the events of December 29, 2017, which took place in an apartment on McMillan Drive in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. The caller, a plumber named Sean Ferridan, made a chilling discovery: pieces of human flesh clogging the sewer pipes. Further investigation led law enforcement to the doorstep of 45-year-old Adam Strong, who lived in the apartment below. To everyone's great surprise, Strong immediately confessed that he was storing human remains in his freezer. But this was just the tip of the iceberg in this complex and horrifying story. The roots of this tragedy run much deeper and require careful examination to determine to whom these remains belonged and how they ended up in the bathroom sewer. The year 2017 brought a horrific crime to the city of Oshawa that shook the entire country. On September 11th, a disturbing discovery was made in Lake Ontario near the shore of Oshawa. A 5-year-old boy fishing with his grandfather spotted human torsos in the water. Law enforcement immediately arrived at the scene, retrieved the remains from the water, and launched an investigation. Despite extensive searches involving divers, no other body parts were found. The autopsies showed that the torsos belonged to a woman, but the exact cause of death could not be determined. However, the nature of the injuries indicated a violent death. The absence of the head made it extremely difficult to identify the victim, so DNA analysis was the only way. And only on November 9, 2017, 2 months after the terrible discovery, the bitter truth was revealed. The torsos belonged to 18-year-old Rori Hache, a pregnant Oshawa resident who had gone missing at the end of August of the same year. Rori Hache was born on July 9, 1999, and was the favorite of her mother, Shannon Dion. Little is known about her father, but some of the girl's relatives had a reputation for living a reckless lifestyle. Her grandfather, Bernard, a former biker, gangster, and boxer, was widely known as the founder and leader of the motorcycle club Satan's Choice. Rori's uncle, Harley, also belonged to the motorcycle club Hell's Angels. But despite these family ties, Rori's childhood was fairly quiet. She was described as a kind and smart girl. In addition to her mother, Rori had a very close relationship with her godmother and Shannon's best friend, Christy Melnick. In the lower grades, Rori excelled in her studies, and at the age of 13, she even received the prestigious title of Cadet of the Year in the local unit. But everything changed for the worse in the first year of high school, when someone introduced her to drugs, which led to addiction. The next years of Rori's life were filled with turbulence, and drugs became an integral part of her existence. In an attempt to finance her addiction, she resorted to prostitution, causing even more suffering for her mother. Shannon, in desperation, turned to Child Protective Services for help, hoping to save her daughter. Fortunately, in early 2017, Shannon's efforts paid off. Rori finally began to take steps to change her life. She found a job, returned to school, and seemed to find stability by moving in with her boyfriend, Tony. Despite all the hardships, Rori was determined to start a new chapter in her life. In August 2017, Rori told her mother about her pregnancy. She firmly decided to have the baby, and Shannon supported her decision. But the mother had no idea that her daughter had started using drugs again. On August 28th, near the shopping center, Rori met with Constable Christopher Kane. He had been watching the girl for a long time and was trying in every way to involve social services to help her overcome her addiction. During the conversation, Rori admitted that she was using drugs again and was engaged in prostitution to get money for a fix. Concerned about Rori's fate, Constable Kane decided to contact the appropriate services, but when he returned, the girl had already disappeared. On August 29, 2017, the day after meeting with the constable, a friend of her mother brought Rori to the hospital after an exacerbation of a mental disorder. Unfortunately, for unknown reasons, they were unable to stay with her and left after a few minutes, leaving Rori alone. Remarkably, just 15 minutes later, she decided to leave the hospital without waiting for the necessary medical care. Surveillance cameras captured Rori calmly leaving the building. This was the last confirmation that the girl was still alive. From that moment on, nothing was known about her whereabouts. When Rori's relatives and friends did not receive any news from her for several days, they became alarmed. Fearing the worst, they filed a missing person report with the police, which launched a massive search. Flyers with the photo of the missing person were posted all over the area, but all efforts to find Rori Hache proved futile, and only the results of the DNA test brought the horrible news, confirming that she had become a victim of a violent crime. However, the investigation did not end there. Law enforcement faced a difficult task to find the rest of her body parts and piece together all the fragments of this tragic puzzle. And it seemed that success was near, but it came so unexpectedly that it exceeded all expectations. 2 months after the gruesome torso discovery, residents of the upstairs apartment at 19 McMillan Drive experienced persistent sewage problems. The situation escalated to the point where the couple had to call a plumber on December 29th. Since no blockages were found in the upper apartment, the workers asked permission to enter the apartment of 45-year-old Adam Strong, located on the floor below. When the plumber started working in his toilet, the air filled with an unbearable stench, different from the usual smells. The situation further escalated when Adam's behavior became nervous. He constantly walked around the room, closely monitoring every move and asking many questions. Despite being annoyed by his behavior, the plumbers tried to ignore it. Strong justified himself by saying that he was just curious because he himself had tried to cope with the problem, but to no avail. Perhaps they would have completely ignored Adam if it were not for the shocking discovery inside the pipe. The workers pulled out a 45-centimeter piece of human flesh with attached hair to their horror. Stunned by the gruesome discovery, they immediately notified the police. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived at the scene and confirmed that what was found was indeed human remains. After gathering all the necessary information from the plumbers and the alarmed couple, the officers began a conversation with Adam Strong, preparing for unexpected revelations. But nothing could have prepared them for what the suspect told them. Lowering his head, he confessed that it was human flesh, and if they needed the rest of the body parts, they were in his freezer. Strong was instantly arrested, and the police began searching the apartment. What they saw resembled a house of horrors, dirt everywhere, and the air was permeated with an unbearable stench of decay. In the bathroom, it turned out that Adam had dismantled the toilet, trying to eliminate the blockage. But the real horror awaited law enforcement. In the bedroom in the freezer lay the remains of a young woman with her head hidden in a bag. The body was in a state of decomposition, as Strong had said. Among the remains, a tattoo with the inscription "Je vis I live" was found exactly the same as Rori Hache had. Further DNA examination confirmed that the remains from Adam Strong's apartment belonged to the missing Rori. There was more than enough evidence of her presence there. The girl's blood was found on the walls and ceiling of Adam's bedroom, and his biological fluids were found on her underwear. Rori's sneakers lay wrapped in plastic, spattered with blood. Police also discovered an improvised dissection table set up by Strong. The realization that it was on this table that Adam dismembered his victim made law enforcement officers shudder. During the search of the apartment, numerous sex toys, restraints, and a homemade bomb were also found. Fortunately, the explosives were neutralized in time, and although no one could figure out its origin, due to the lack of direct evidence of Strong's involvement in Rori's murder, the police could not charge him. Instead, he was charged with abusing the body. It was time for the investigation to get to know the life of this 45-year-old man more closely. Adam Strong, about whom little was known, settled in a rented apartment on McMillan in early 2007. For many years, he worked as a security guard on a film set in Oshawa and as a gas station attendant at 2 different stations in Ajax. Those who knew Strong described him as an eccentric man with a sinister character who considered himself smarter than he actually was. He could talk incessantly, not knowing when to stop. One of Adam's ex-girlfriends, whose name has not been disclosed, described him as cruel and prone to excessive control. Adam's landlady, Eugenia Papadakis, also had unpleasant impressions from communicating with Strong. In March 2017, after a fire in the house, she and her granddaughter visited Adam's apartment on McMillan Drive. The dwelling turned out to be cluttered with garbage, food scraps, and all sorts of junk. Needless to say, what they saw stunned the women. In addition, Strong showed an unhealthy interest in pornography, which indicated his passion for explicit content. These observations allowed a deeper look into his psyche and shed light on the dark, disturbing world that reigned in the suspect's apartment. However, despite the tragic circumstances, the evidence gathered was still insufficient to charge him with murder. So the detectives focused on obtaining a confession from Adam Strong. The morning of December 30th, 2017 was marked by the interrogation of Adam Strong, conducted by detectives from the Homicide Investigation Unit, Darren Short and Herman Daroga. By that time, the suspect had already managed to contact his lawyer. The investigators realized that this was their only chance to get valuable testimony from him, because the next day, there was to be a hearing on the possibility of releasing Strong on bail. After that, it would be impossible to interrogate him without a court order. Time was running out, so the detectives had to get important information from Adam by any means necessary. Starting the interrogation, the investigators had no clear idea what to expect. Deep down, they hoped that Strong would be nervous, because he had finally been caught.
So Adam, my name is Detective Short.
Hello, Detective.
My first name is Darren. This is Detective Drago. And what's your name?
Adam.
Last name?
Strong.
Strong, okay. As of right now, what I want to tell you is the charge you're going to be facing right now is indignity to a body.
Instead, they were faced with an imperturbable, collected man who showed outright indifference to his situation. But the biggest problem was getting him to talk about the events related to Rori Hache. Adam's stubbornness was surprising, especially considering his previous confession about human remains in the freezer. Realizing that time was running out, the detectives decided to change tactics. They tried to touch Strong's emotions, hoping to awaken at least a drop of remorse or sympathy for the victim and her loved ones. However, all attempts by investigators to get the desired answers were shattered against a wall of evasions and changes of subject.
How did you know Rori?
I'm not saying anything, I'm sorry.
Did you kill Rori?
Sorry, I'm not saying anything.
Adam's responses were shocking, but the only thing that seemed to affect him were photos of Rori, which he refused to look at. It was obvious that the suspect could no longer bear her gaze, and although the evidence gathered was quite enough to prove Rori Hache's presence in Adam's apartment, the ultimate goal of the detectives was to
Uncover the truth about what happened and what led to the girl's tragic death. Unfortunately, Strong proved to be a tough nut to crack. No answers to questions about Rori. 2 hours later, it became obvious that the interrogation had reached a dead end. Adam's refusal to provide anything substantial raised more questions than answers. Having failed to succeed, the investigators reluctantly decided to stop the interrogation. What exactly brought Rori Hache and Adam Strong together remained a mystery. Fortunately for the detectives, the suspect was not released on bail, so he remained in custody. Meanwhile, Oshawa police continued to search Adam's house, hoping to stumble upon new evidence and clues. The coroner's report on Rori's autopsy shed some light on the circumstances. It turned out that the girl's body had numerous injuries, including skull fractures. However, the forensic expert could not say with certainty whether these injuries were inflicted before or after her death. In addition, traces of drugs were found in the victim's body, and signs of the use of a restraining device were found on the body. Among the findings in Strong's house, the detective's attention was drawn to a bent hammer on which Rori's DNA was found. Investigators suggested that it was the murder weapon. However, even this was not the most shocking discovery, even when it seemed that nothing more would be found. In July 2018, 7 months after Adam's arrest, a hunting knife covered in human tissue was found in a kitchen drawer. Examination showed that the DNA found on the blade did not belong to Rori. Instead, it matched the genetic profile of another girl, Candace Fitzpatrick. Candace was born on February 3, 1989, and little is known about her childhood. The girl's parents, William Fitzpatrick, and a woman whose name has not been disclosed, divorced. After that, William moved to Alberta, and Candace stayed with her mother in Oshawa. Her life was chaotic and disorderly. At some point, she ran away from home, forcing her father to go looking for her in Oshawa. After reuniting, Candace declared her desire to live independently. And by the age of 19 in 2008, her life had turned into complete disorder. Like Rori, Candace was a troubled girl who struggled with drug addiction and engaged in prostitution to get money for her next fix. She could disappear from home for days or weeks at a time, but always returned. Until March 2008, from then on, her relatives never saw her alive again. William, growing increasingly worried about his daughter, launched a massive search throughout Oshawa. Oddly enough, an official missing person report for Candace was only filed with the police in 2010, 2 years after her disappearance. William reported that back in 2008, He had repeatedly contacted law enforcement, but they did not take the case seriously due to the peculiarities of Candace's lifestyle. 10 long years of painful uncertainty passed before the Fitzpatrick family finally learned the terrible truth they had long feared. The shocking coincidences between the fates of Candace and Rori were not limited to difficult life circumstances alone. Even outwardly, the girls were strikingly similar. The cruel irony of fate is that despite the 10-year difference in their disappearances, both died at the hands of the same person. It is unbearable to realize that if Adam had been exposed after Candace's murder, Rori could have been alive. The remains of Candace Fitzpatrick still have not been found, and the solution to this chilling mystery is known only to one person. Investigators managed to convince the prosecutor to drop the initial charge against Adam Strong and reclassify it as a charge of first-degree murder of Rori Hache and Candace Fitzpatrick. This gave detectives the opportunity to interrogate the suspect again. Realizing the importance and complexity of the case, the Oshawa police leadership involved Detective Paul Mitten in the investigation, a highly qualified and experienced investigator, known for his ability to unravel the most complicated crimes. On November 18, 2018, 11 months after the first interrogation, Adam Strong again found himself face-to-face with the investigation. This interrogation was to be decisive. To the surprise of Detective Paul Mitten, the suspect suddenly began voluntarily sharing information.
Adam!
How you doing?
Good, you?
Had better days.
Oh.
I understand I'm in a lot of trouble. Is there any way I can get a cigarette?
What are you gonna hankering for?
Wendy's triple?
Yeah, that's doable.
No pickles? Iced tea, no ice? Two, their value, spicy chicken wraps, and a grilled chicken Caesar salad.
Okay.
Is that outrageous?
No, that's doable.
I don't know how appropriate this is, but I'd like you to pass on to her mother and her father my condolences. I would like to, and I've fielded this to my lawyer, and he's not interested in it, and I don't understand why, of spilling the beans and being as comfortable as I can in jail. Not like $100,000 like Picton, but like an allowance. I don't know. I don't know. Like internet access, like a TV. Like I don't have anybody who's gonna buy me a TV. She's definitely deceased.
Yes.
Yes.
And you clearly have said you're not disposed of her.
Yes.
Yes.
Tried to, but unfortunately was foiled by inadequate plumbing.
Yep.
And that's a freaking shame. Not for me. For me.
Yeah, for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You sound really selfish when you say that.
Sorry. I don't expect to get out of the jail free card. I don't. I just want to be comfortable in jail, man.
Okay.
I didn't feel it. I'm really sorry.
Obviously, hours leading into a couple of days, I would imagine.
No, it was all done in one evening.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Like this was all one piece, and then this was all one piece.
I couldn't. Yeah.
Really?
Sorry, man. I don't remember.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't important to me, man.
I hope one day the light bulb goes off for you. Not that you're find remorse, but just for you to realize you could help some people feel better.
Yeah.
Adam was convinced that their conversation would be limited exclusively to the topic of dismemberment of bodies. He did not even suspect that his own careless confessions and slips of the tongue would allow investigators to draw key conclusions about the entire chronology of events related to the horrific crimes. The interrogation lasted 10 grueling hours and ended only when Detective Mitten felt he had obtained all the necessary testimony.
Is it safe to assume as an investigator that Candace is
I can't go into that.
similar?
I can't go into that.
How did you meet Candace?
You know what? So long ago, I have no idea.
Do you remember you met her like more than once, or was it just one time you met her?
Sorry, because every time she came to my house, she left my house. Under her own power.
Candace, given the fact that we're gonna assume because of tissue found on that knife
Didn't even think of it.
Because her DNA wasn't found.
Didn't even think of it. I'm a real bad procrastinator, and that is really a detriment to myself.
On September 28, 2020, when 12 years had passed since Candace's disappearance and 3 years since Rori's disappearance, Adam Strong appeared in court on charges of these murders. Despite numerous evidence gathered against him, he refused to plead guilty to both counts. During the trial, the prosecution presented a powerful evidence base, including stunning records of interrogations that supported their case against Adam Strong. Testimony from Petra Danchin about the violence she suffered at the hands of the defendant further strengthened the weight of the accusations. Although Adam never revealed the details of Rori's death during interrogations, prosecutors built their case based on the available facts. According to their version, Strong lured the girl to his house by promising money for intimate services. As soon as she entered, he tied her up and brutally beat her with a hammer found in his home. Horribly, at that moment there was no one on the upper floor, so no one heard the desperate cries for help. After the murder, Adam dismembered Rori's lifeless body and threw the torso into Oshawa Harbor. Geolocation data from her mobile phone confirmed that on September 4th, a week before the discovery of human remains, Strong was in that area, which only strengthened the evidence against him. Prosecutors also expressed confidence that Candace suffered the same fate at the hands of the killer, although her remains had not been found at that time. Lawyers, however, insisted on Adam's non-involvement in Rori's death, claiming that death occurred as a result of a drug overdose, and their client was only trying to get rid of the body. As for Candace, the defense claimed that there was a lack of evidence that she had died in Strong's house at all. They also emphasized the limited size of the freezer, which could hardly hold the remains of 2 victims. However, having carefully examined all the evidence presented, Judge Joseph DeLuca came to the unshakable conviction of Adam Strong's guilt. He rejected the defense's arguments and found the prosecution's evidence convincing and incriminating. Strong tried to justify his actions with the traumatic experience of his childhood. According to him, at an early age, he was subjected to a brutal attack that left an indelible imprint on his psyche. Adam even expressed sympathy for the families of the deceased, but the sincerity of these words was highly doubtful. His behavior demonstrated an alarming level of indifference, lack of remorse, and signs of a split personality. The materials presented during the trial vividly demonstrated that Adam Strong was well aware of the severity of his actions and their consequences. He acted consciously and prudently, without feeling any remorse. In fact, the defendant viewed prison as a way to escape from life's troubles. In the face of unemployment and financial hardship, he was ready to exchange his freedom for the basic benefits that imprisonment could guarantee. The court found that Rori Hache's death occurred as a result of an attack, so Adam Strong was found guilty of first-degree murder. As for Candace Fitzpatrick, his guilt was classified as manslaughter. In May 2021, Strong was sentenced to life imprisonment. In addition, for the murder of Candace, he received an additional 80-year term, which is to be served concurrently with life imprisonment. This is the maximum punishment provided for by the country's legislation. Although nothing could bring back the dead girls, Rori and Candace relatives felt that justice had finally prevailed. In July 2021, Strong provided valuable information about the location of Candace Fitzpatrick's remains. Thanks to his testimony, on November 4th of the same year, the police found the place where, according to the criminal, he had buried the girl's body. On November 8th, law enforcement officers finally managed to find human remains. After conducting the necessary examinations, on November 13th, they were officially identified as the remains of Candace. The final identification results were announced at a press conference on February 16, 2022. What exactly made Adam Strong change his behavior and start talking remains a mystery. Some suggest that he sought notoriety through his actions. However, despite the tragic circumstances that united their fates, the families of Rori Hache and Candace Fitzpatrick continue to support each other, and together overcome the painful consequences of the horror they experienced. The cases of the murders of these girls have been solved. The victim's family was unspeakably happy after the announcement of the verdict for their daughter's killer, because they understood that he would never leave prison alive. But the investigation suspects that Adam Strong may be involved in other murders as well. In June 2022, during a search of his apartment, The police seized some physical evidence. However, the details of this finding are being kept secret while additional investigations are ongoing. Let's consider the main reasons that led to this tragedy. 1. Drug addiction. Both victims, Rori and Candace, struggled with drug addiction. This made them vulnerable and forced them to engage in risky behavior such as prostitution to finance their addiction. 2. Social isolation. Although both girls had families who cared about them, their lifestyle often led to isolation from loved ones and support. 3. Insufficient attention from law enforcement. In the case of Candace Fitzpatrick, her father's initial reports of her disappearance were not taken seriously due to her lifestyle. Now, I would like to share some important tips on how to avoid similar situations in the future. 1. Fight drug addiction. If you or someone you love is suffering from drug addiction, seek professional help immediately. There are many rehabilitation and support programs that can help overcome addiction. 2. Stay in touch with loved ones. Communicate regularly with family and friends. If you notice that someone close to you is distancing themselves or behaving unusually, don't ignore it. Offer your support and assistance. 3. Be vigilant. If you notice something suspicious in your surroundings, unusual smells, strange behavior of neighbors, don't be shy to report it to the appropriate authorities. Your vigilance can save someone's life. 4. Take disappearances seriously. If someone you know has gone missing, report it to the police immediately. Don't wait, hoping that the person will return on their own. Every hour can be crucial. 5. Teach children about safety. Talk to children about personal safety. Teach them to recognize potentially dangerous situations and people. Explain how important it is to trust their intuition and not be ashamed to ask for help. 6. Don't judge but help. Instead of judging people for their lifestyle, try to understand their problems and offer help. Often people find themselves in difficult situations due to circumstances they cannot control. This tragic story of Rori Hache and Candace Fitzpatrick demonstrates to us how important it is to be vigilant and caring members of society. We all have a responsibility for the safety of our community. It is important to remember that criminals like Adam Strong often look for vulnerable victims. They may seem like ordinary people, but behind this mask lie dangerous intentions. Therefore, it is critically important to learn to recognize alarming signs and not ignore them. This case also highlights the need to reform the system for responding to missing persons. Regardless of the lifestyle of the missing person, every case must be investigated with the same seriousness and thoroughness. Perhaps if the police had responded more quickly to Candace's disappearance, the tragedy with Rori could have been prevented. Remember that safety is a shared responsibility. Each of us can contribute to creating a safer society. Be attentive to your surroundings, support those who need it, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you feel that something is wrong. Taylor Bell, a high school graduate from the small town of Vienna in the state of Virginia, USA, decided to enter Virginia Commonwealth University. This educational institution, located in the state capital of Richmond, was famous for its first-class infrastructure and vibrant nightlife that revolved around the student body. The university, known for its achievements in the field of biotechnology, had about 30,000 students. For Taylor, the university's location was ideal, as it allowed her not to move too far away from her caring mother. Initially, the girl often traveled between the two cities, living for some time in Richmond with close friends of her parents. But later, she decided to settle directly on the university campus. On September 5, 2005, Taylor Bell intended to visit one of the local restaurants to have dinner with her friend Ben. After the meal, the student planned to skateboard with him through the city streets at night and then return to campus. That same morning, Taylor met with Ben to borrow his skateboard for a while, intending to return it in the evening. Around 10 in the evening, after meeting her friend, the girl came to the dormitory. However, her roommate was spending time with her boyfriend and asked Taylor not to disturb them. The girl agreed to leave, taking only her car keys, cell phone, and $40 in cash. Her purse was left in the room. Before leaving, the heroine told her roommate that she would return in a couple of hours. Contrary to her promise, Taylor did not appear in the dormitory either at the specified time or even the next day. The girl stopped communicating, did not respond on social networks, behaved very atypically for herself. Attempts to call her turned out to be futile, and all text messages sent through messengers remained unread. On September 7, 2005, the girl's mother went to the police with a statement about her daughter's disappearance. Law enforcement officers treated this without much enthusiasm, believing that the adult girl had just gone out somewhere and would soon return on her own. After all, students disappear almost every day, but in 99% of cases, such stories end with the favorable return of young people. Guys and girls can disappear for several days or more, spending time at parties with friends. A week had passed since Taylor's disappearance, and the police officers had not found out anything. Under pressure from the missing girl's relatives, the officers finally took the case seriously. They checked Taylor's activity on social networks and on her mobile phone, but found that the girl had completely stopped using them. This convinced law enforcement that the family was telling the truth, that something bad had happened to Taylor. Moreover, all the girl's things, including clothes, cosmetics, money, and a purse, were left in the dorm room. Taylor had never been out for long without these things before. In addition, no transfers or payments were recorded on her bank cards, which finally convinced the detectives of the seriousness of the situation. The police turned to the public for help through the media, but unfortunately this did not yield any results. Soon Taylor's car was found, a white 1997 Ford Escort. It was parked just a few kilometers from the university campus. Law enforcement decided to put the car under surveillance for at least 12 hours, hoping that the likely criminal would return to it. Unfortunately, this did not happen, so the car was sent for examination. Taylor had no idea that her disappearance would become a real nightmare for the police, and especially for her loved ones. At the initial stage of the investigation, the detectives came across the first alarming find. It turned out that license plates stolen 2 months before the girl's disappearance were installed on Taylor's car. This suggested the involvement of a quick-witted and knowledgeable criminal in the case. As it became known, the numbers were registered in the state of Ohio. Investigators found that they belonged to a former resident of that state who had recently moved to Richmond. The owner of the numbers turned out to be a student who had previously reported their theft to the police. His words were confirmed, so suspicions were removed from him. In fact, such a trick was not something extraordinary, because some criminals resort to such tricks in order to confuse the trail and gain extra time. To obtain more information, experts from various fields were involved in the inspection of Taylor's vehicle. However, despite a thorough examination, this did not yield any results. Analyzing the missing girl's social circle, investigators immediately drew attention to a 38-year-old amateur photographer named Ben Folly, with whom Taylor was friends and met shortly before her disappearance. The man had no alibi for that evening. His testimony was confused and contradictory. He could not clearly explain where exactly he spent the night after Taylor's disappearance.
Ben's apartment was of particular interest to detectives. They obtained search warrants for his home, as well as the room on campus that the missing girl shared with her roommate. The man immediately got on the list of suspects, because after questioning, investigators concluded that there was an intimate relationship between him and Taylor, and that he was clearly hiding something. During a check of Ben's computer, shocking facts were discovered. It turned out that the man owned several sites where he posted quite specific content. On one of these resources, he published photos of naked and half-naked girls, and all of them were much younger than him. Some of them were minors. There were even pictures of very young children aged 3-4 years. The missing girl also posed for Ben. Taylor's mother was convinced that the photographer was using her daughter's photos illegally. In addition to these dubious activities, Ben had a criminal history related to stalking and domestic violence. Immediately after the start of the investigation, it was noticed that the man began to hastily delete his sites, probably trying to hide something from the police. He even sent a message to his subscribers about the need for an urgent cleaning. It should be noted that Taylor lived in the early 2000s, when young people were just beginning to actively use the internet. It was all new. Previously, in order to find out something about a person's identity, it was necessary to communicate with them personally or with their immediate environment for a long time. However, the example of Taylor and Ben clearly demonstrated to detectives how easy it is to obtain valuable information about a person from social networks. Studying the girl's digital footprint on the internet, the police paid attention to her profile on the suspect's website. Here, Taylor appeared completely different than in real life. Instead of a self-confident, sociable, and active girl, she seemed a frightened and withdrawn person. Judging by the restrained description in the profile, she was looking for new acquaintances in Richmond,
since she had recently moved and did not know many people in this city yet. Investigators managed to find out that Taylor last logged into this site on September 4th, 2005, less than a day before her disappearance. That day, the girl actively corresponded with several friends. Basically, these were light, easy conversations with jokes. Already after Taylor disappeared and people began to worry about her, a huge number of messages with words of love and support were sent to her address. Numerous friends of the girl by correspondence sincerely wished that she would return home as soon as possible, safe and sound. They did not even suspect what the heroine of this story really had to go through. Police uncovered the main suspect's dark secrets step by step, and there turned out to be quite a few of them. Having analyzed the history of correspondence over the past few months, the detectives concluded that most of Taylor's online communication consisted of dialogues with Ben. As it turned out, very frank conversations took place between them, from which it followed that the couple had an intimate relationship once, and this happened even before the girl moved to the campus in Richmond. The missing girl's friend reported that after intimacy with Ben, Taylor no longer wanted to maintain an intimate relationship with him, but continued to communicate as a friend. Also, police officers noticed that after the start of the investigation, Ben began to hastily delete and edit his messages, which only increased their suspicions that the man had something to hide. The relationship between Ben and Taylor also included shooting explicit photos. Even before moving to Richmond, the girl repeatedly visited Ben. For meetings, they chose unusual locations, for example, abandoned old buildings. Of course, this is not the best place for dates, but Ben insisted on such conditions for creating explicit shots. He believed that the gloomy atmosphere was ideal for the embodiment of his ideas, and he considered his work as works of art. In many messages, the name of the couple's favorite place was mentioned, Belle Isle, located on the James River in the very heart of the city. Analyzing the correspondence, the investigators concluded that Taylor herself, despite her young age, took the initiative in the relationship with Ben. At the same time, the police suggested that an adult man still had some influence on the girl, because the age difference was a whole 20 years. Taylor herself, in her messages, called this difference life experience and did not see anything wrong with it. An important role in the investigation was played by Taylor's personal diaries, which the detectives managed to find. These records reflected the typical experiences of a teenager who had already left childhood but had not yet reached full maturity. Here were doubts, fears, anxieties, and thoughts that the girl could not share with anyone. For his part, Ben was known for his attraction to very young girls. All these facts, together with the history of violations of the law, played against him. Of course, Taylor, being a student, did not suspect that Ben was publishing explicit photos in which she posed on the internet. The girl sincerely believed that they were doing art solely for themselves, and no outsiders would see these pictures. According to investigators, she became another victim of the alleged criminal. From the pages of the diary, the police learned that Taylor met with different men, preferring those older than herself. Her idol was actor Johnny Depp, whose features she subconsciously sought in every adult acquaintance. Many believed that Ben outwardly resembled a celebrity. Perhaps this is what attracted the girl to him. At that time, there was no information about Taylor's fate. Detectives continued to question her inner circle. The parents told the investigators the story of their daughter's life. For some time, the family lived in Great Britain and Belgium, often moving from place to place, since the girl's mother was married to an officer of the Royal Air Force. After the breakup of that marriage, the mother and daughter were able to return to their native Virginia. The woman got married several more times, but these attempts also turned out to be unsuccessful. Taylor was a very energetic girl with a compliant character, very smart, sometimes even too much for her age. These traits helped her quickly adapt to new schools. In total, young Taylor changed about 15 educational institutions before receiving a certificate and entering university. Everywhere, she easily made friends and made acquaintances. Sometimes the girl seemed too soft and trusting. For a long time, the mother tried to protect her daughter, believing that she was not yet ready for an independent adult life. The biography of the missing girl turned out to be full of ambiguous facts and secrets. The mother described Taylor as a willful and energetic girl. She grew up in a privileged environment surrounded by conservative and wealthy people. However, Taylor wanted to know the other side of life too, so after entering university, she decided to move to another city and settle on campus in order to achieve her goals on her own. Unfortunately, the young student did not even realize the dangers that could lurk behind the walls of a student dormitory. Despite good intentions, such places also have a dark side. Sometimes they turn into a real hotbed of undesirable phenomena among young people. Theft, substance abuse, promiscuous sexual relations. Since students are in close contact with each other, all this begins to manifest itself more clearly. At the same time, the vast majority of dorm residents are really focused on studying and getting an education. Without a wealth of life experience, it is very difficult to objectively assess the situation, which is what happened to Taylor. In the opinion of law enforcement officers, the missing girl made several serious mistakes at once. First of all, this concerns the relationship with a man who was twice her age, had convictions and mental health problems. A former girlfriend and a former roommate confirmed that Ben suffered from bipolar disorder, had sharp mood swings, and problems with anger control. In addition, detectives considered Taylor's decision to leave campus after 10 in the evening fatal. No one accompanied her, and she simply disappeared in the dark. And what is your opinion on this? Write in the comments, I will be interested to read. Investigators began compiling lists of dormitory neighbors who aroused suspicion. Police officers identified several students who were actively involved in the distribution of narcotic substances on campus. However, their alibi was confirmed. The mother of the missing girl suggested that the attack on Taylor could have been committed by several attackers. However, the most suspicious figure in this story remained 38-year-old Ben Folly, and detectives continued to closely investigate his identity. The man led a very active life on the internet. He owned several websites on various topics and revealed a lot of information about himself. Ben's subscribers even knew his shoe size, but compared to some of his thematic resources, this data seemed like a trifle. One of the most creepy turned out to be a site where a man published his distorted vision of beauty. He considered it creativity, but to detectives it seemed evidence of serious mental problems. On this resource, Ben combined images of naked bodies of models much younger than him, with images of death, decaying flesh, and gothic motives. He often used real animal bones and skulls in his work. As it turned out, Ben managed to intrigue the 17-year-old student with his gloomy creativity. This is where their relationship began. It became known that before disappearing, Taylor felt lonely. In her notes, the girl admitted that she missed her friends who remained in her hometown. She had close friends and comrades, and in Richmond she had not yet managed to make enough acquaintances. Probably, that's why she communicated with the eccentric Ben. Of course, a passion for creepy images in itself did not make him a kidnapper, rapist, or murderer. But in combination with other facts of the man's biography, it caused more and more serious concerns. Studying Ben's online activity, police noticed that he displayed two completely different personalities. On the one hand, he appeared as a kind, loving, vulnerable, and creative person. On the other hand, numerous ex-girlfriends who posed for his photographs complained about him. Several former passions claimed that Ben was jealous, cruel, aggressive, and dangerous. Some girls even became victims of physical violence at his hands, although these episodes were too insignificant to report to the police. Instead, they simply broke off relations with the man after the first manifestations of aggression. But could an inexperienced 17-year-old student react incorrectly to such behavior and provoke an outburst of anger that led to murder? Suspicions about Ben Folly grew, but direct evidence was still lacking. Suddenly, on September 23, 2005, a new post appeared on Taylor's social media page. At 11:24 a.m., a message was published in which the girl claimed that she was fine and would soon return to her family. She mentioned some problems that needed to be urgently resolved, but did not go into details. Taylor's page gained considerable popularity after her disappearance and was under the close attention of many people. Therefore, the news of this post instantly spread around the city. However, the police considered the post an attempt at staging, as no one had yet managed to contact Taylor. Law enforcement officers did not believe that this message was written by the girl herself. On the same day that the new post appeared, the main suspect, Ben Folly, was arrested on charges of creating and storing pornographic materials involving minors. But the man insisted that none of the photographs found in his apartment belonged to him. According to him, these pictures were left by the previous tenant of the dwelling. At this stage of the investigation, the police had not yet charged Ben with official charges of involvement in Taylor's disappearance. In fact, He was not the only suspect in this case, but he certainly turned out to be the most colorful figure on the list. Given the time that had passed, the likelihood that the girl was still alive was extremely low. However, the investigators did not yet have convincing evidence against Folly. In any case, the trial regarding the obscene photos gave the detectives extra time to work while the suspect was behind bars. Meanwhile, the police came across a strange post by Ben published on September 8th. According to his story, he was attacked that evening. The man even had to file a report about this with the police. In one of his blogs, he described this incident in detail. According to Ben, 3 or 4 attackers attacked him. They immediately put a black bag over his head so he could not see their faces. Folly got away without serious injuries, but the attackers threw him out of the car somewhere on the outskirts of the city in the morning. They stole $20 from him, a camera and a tripod. The man had to walk to the city for a long time. However, during searches in his house, investigators found several expensive tripods and professional filming equipment at once. Such a variety of equipment looked suspicious, because officially Ben did not work anywhere and lived on disability benefits due to bipolar disorder. The main suspect definitely could not afford such expensive purchases while receiving only state payments. Investigators intensified their efforts, trying to gather as much evidence as possible during a search of Folly's home. They managed to find several boxes with provocative items, from cold weapons, such as a huge machete, to sadomasochistic paraphernalia. Of course, the man claimed that all this was a prop for photo shoots. In addition, a suspicious stain resembling blood was found in Ben's house. Samples were sent for analysis. After the publication in the media of information about the seized items, suspicions about the amateur photographer with eccentric artistic views only intensified. Interestingly, the bloodstain was found on the man's bed spring frame. Experienced police officers immediately asked themselves the question, how much blood would have to be shed for it to soak through the mattress and reach the springs? During searches of the area around Folly's house, several strange items were found in a dumpster, including a necklace and a watch. Clearly not the kind of accessories that people usually just get rid of. The police were also puzzled by the huge machete found in Ben's home. However, according to his statements, it served as a prop for photo shoots. In addition, the machete allegedly helped him make his way through dense thickets on the way to abandoned buildings and chop wood for a fire. In fact, the police had at least one more suspect named Jesse Schultz, whom they also thoroughly checked. It turned out that this was a 22-year-old student whose trail was managed to be found with the help of service dogs. When Taylor's car was found, specially trained dogs were used to search for the alleged criminal's scent traces. In the end, the scent trail led to the house where this young man lived. According to Jesse's confession, he began dating Taylor in August 2005. It was during this period, almost immediately after the girl moved to Richmond, that alarming entries appeared in her diaries. The Schultz family turned out to be the same friends of Taylor's father with whom she lived in the first days after arriving in the city. Despite all the efforts of the investigators, the truth about what happened to Taylor turned out to be much more terrible than they could have imagined. Taylor immediately began to complain about the son of the Schultz couple. According to the girl, the young man was so intrusive in his courtship of her that she no longer felt safe under their roof. This is what caused her to move to the university campus. However, Taylor did not mention that they were dating. After the service dogs picked up the trail that led to Jesse, law enforcement officers conducted thorough searches in his home. Traces of narcotic substances were found in the guy's room, which gave grounds for his detention. However, no concrete evidence of Jesse's involvement in Taylor's disappearance was found. In addition, he had a reliable alibi, so his name was soon crossed off the list of suspects. On October 5th, 2005, investigators spoke with one of the missing girl's friends named Kevin. Despite the fact that they only met 4 times in total, this was enough for Kevin to give the impression of Taylor as an extremely trusting person. In addition, in his opinion, the girl was quite pliable and easily influenced by others. The last time they saw Taylor was the day before her disappearance. At that time, the girl seemed very inspired and excited. On the eve of her 18th birthday, she confessed to Kevin that she was going to do something risky, but did not specify what she meant. The guy suggested that it was about some kind of photo shoot. Already post factum, Kevin found out about Taylor's disappearance. On the same day, he turned to the police to tell about the recent events in the girl's life that he had to witness. In particular, it was during that meeting that he first saw Ben Folly, whom Taylor introduced as her photographer friend. Kevin immediately felt hostility towards this man because he made a very suspicious impression on him. Later, Ben himself contacted Kevin, trying to find Taylor, because he could not do it on his own. The guy had a clear feeling that the photographer was hiding something. Throughout October, the search for the missing girl continued. Police officers examined numerous locations in the vicinity of Richmond. These were places that Ben photographed as part of his project dedicated to highlighting the city's problems. One of these objects even had a separate blog of the man dedicated to it. About 100 kilometers from Richmond, in Matthews County, the body of a young woman was found in a shallow pit. It was impossible to identify her on the spot due to significant damage. The body was in a terrible condition. The soft tissues had significantly decomposed due to environmental influences and the activity of small animals like wild dogs. It was a horrifying sight, and one of the forensic experts literally could not stop his mouth from gagging at what he saw. Identification of the deceased's identity became possible only thanks to the recognition of fragments of clothing by her mother. In the end, the examination finally confirmed that the found remains belonged to the missing Taylor Bell. The woman was devastated by grief and vowed to make every effort to punish the monster who committed this terrible crime against her daughter. The place where the body was found was established, thanks to photographs taken by Ben. The attention of law enforcement officers was attracted by one of the locations that the man had been excessively interested in recently. It was decided to carefully examine the outbuildings located there, which brought results. The body of the deceased was found behind one of the barns on private property. Experts found that soil particles from the tires of Taylor's car were identical to soil samples taken near the barn. This indicated that the criminal had transported the body in the girl's car and then drove the car to another location. Most likely, Taylor was attacked almost immediately after she left the campus. It took no more than a few hours before she was dead. Fragments of duct tape were found on the remains of the body, suggesting that the girl was held tied up. Police turned to Ben Folly for comment. He claimed that the abduction was planned and carried out by his ex-girlfriend with the participation of several beefy young men. He himself was allegedly under the influence of drugs, did not directly participate in this madness, and does not remember anything. However, this testimony sounded extremely unconvincing. After confirmation of the worst fears, Taylor's family was waiting for only one thing: justice. After the discovery of the body, all the attention of the local community was riveted to the person of the eccentric amateur photographer. The fact is that Taylor's remains were found near Chesapeake Bay, in an area that had repeatedly appeared in Ben's photographs. This indicated that for a man, this location had a special, perhaps even sacred meaning. The version of a random coincidence was immediately rejected, because Folly was the last to see the girl alive on that fatal evening. In addition, he was previously noticed in such a strange activity as collecting car license plates. Creepy details from Ben's past surfaced. In particular, an incident when he attacked his ex-girlfriend with such rage that the poor girl managed to say goodbye to life. After that attack, the defendant even inflicted bodily injuries on himself. The conflict reached such a serious scale that the girl, miraculously saved, was forced to take a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend. An internet investigation revealed a whole series of similar cases of Ben's inappropriate behavior towards his passions. Gradually, the level of aggression in his actions only increased. All these facts formed in the eyes of detectives the image of a mentally unstable man with deviant tendencies who lured young, trusting girls into his networks. On January 17, 2006, Ben Folly was officially charged with the abduction, rape, and willful murder of Taylor Bell. Unfortunately, due to the extremely poor preservation of the body, forensic experts were never able to accurately determine all the circumstances of the girl's death. This led to the fact that already in February, serious amendments had to be made to the initial charges. At that time, the suspect was already serving a sentence for storing pornographic materials depicting minors. In the end, in August, Ben made a deal with the investigation and pleaded guilty to the crimes he was charged with, albeit very selectively choosing the wording. According to his version of events, that evening, he met with Taylor immediately after she left the campus. Together, they went to a deserted place, where in the back seat of the car, Ben allegedly tied the girl's hands behind her back with duct tape, after which they had rough consensual sex. Then, in a fit of passion, the man allegedly accidentally strangled his partner. He left the body in the forest, and the next day he returned to hide the remains. Most of the facts cited by Ben remained unsubstantiated allegations that are difficult to prove. Although the forensic expert was unable to unequivocally determine the cause of Taylor's death, he insisted on its violent nature. After all, even with accidental strangulation, it takes effort for several minutes for a lethal result to occur. So the attacker could have released the victim at any time. The prosecution insisted that Ben deliberately tied the girl's wrists, not for sexual games, but to deprive her of the opportunity to resist. And this meant that the whole story he voiced was a complete lie and the events unfolded in a completely different way. Folly stood his ground, assuring that the duct tape was part of a role-playing game. However, no one believed this version. Taylor's friends stated that she was never interested in extreme sexual practices such as asphyxia or bondage. While recreating the picture of events described by the accused, the investigators came to an unambiguous conclusion that the scenario he voiced does not stand up to any criticism. In the cramped space of a car, and even with her hands tied behind her back, the girl would be in an extremely uncomfortable and vulnerable position. Taking into account Taylor's character and habits, it is unlikely that she would voluntarily agree to this. A much more plausible version looked like Ben kidnapped, raped, and then killed his victim. The main motive for the crime was considered the girl's refusal to have an intimate relationship with Folly. During the court session, the prosecutor read out a letter that the defendant sent to his ex-girlfriend. It contained the following lines: "I am the cause of Taylor's death. I deserve imprisonment." These words could well be interpreted as an admission of guilt. Ben decided to make a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The rest of the charges against him were dropped. In February 2006, the hapless photographer was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Taylor's mother was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Now the woman knew that the soul killer who took the life of her only daughter had been justly punished. Love is an incredibly complex feeling that can cloud the mind so intensely that it sometimes poses a serious threat to one's life. Usually, a person is able to regain control in time and avoid danger, but occasionally circumstances can be extremely unfavorable for the victim of passion. This is exactly the fate that befell the heroine of our story today. Julie Scully was the daughter of Julia and John Scully. Her childhood was filled with difficulties and hardships, so it's worth starting the story with her parents. Julie's mother was born in 1943 on an Indian reservation located in the state of New Mexico, which was the second largest in the USA. However, despite the vast territory, living conditions there were extremely challenging. The lack of electricity, running water, and jobs led to rampant alcoholism and drug addiction among the local population. When Julia turned 12, her parents, trying to protect their daughter from the detrimental influence of her environment, sent her to a boarding school, hoping that she would learn English there and acquire the necessary skills for a successful future. Upon reaching adulthood, Julia moved to the city and began living like an ordinary American. However, while working in a hospital for the mentally ill, she herself became addicted to drugs. Later, the young Native American woman met a police officer named John, and in 1964, feelings ignited between them. Just 2 days before their one-year anniversary, on July 2, 1965, the couple got married. Shortly after the wedding, John was transferred to serve in one of the most dangerous areas of North Philadelphia. On January 3, 1968, the couple had a daughter, whom they named Julia. Over the years, the girl became very close to her father. All the relatives noted that she was ready to do anything for his approval. John and Julie spent a lot of time together, often going fishing. During these moments, the girl's mother felt like an outsider in the family. While the father had fun with his daughter, the elder Julia suffered from loneliness. All this time, she hid her drug addiction from her loved ones, although those around her could not help but notice the woman's strange and unpredictable behavior. The situation only worsened as Julia moved on to even harder illegal substances. Despite this, on November 10, 1969, another baby was born into the family, a boy named John Patrick Scully. The infant immediately became the center of attention for the parents, and the elder daughter Julie began to feel a lack of love and care. At the same time, her mother continued to use illegal substances. being in a state of constant exhaustion. Any attempts to quit were accompanied by severe withdrawal. In 1973, amid all these problems, the elder Julia tried to take her own life by swallowing a whole pack of sleeping pills. But her husband found her in time, provided first aid, and called an ambulance. The doctors managed to save the woman. Now the whole family knew about her destructive addiction, but this did not improve the situation at all. The once beautiful Native American woman increasingly resembled a living corpse. Soon she tried to settle scores with life for the second time, this time due to depression. But again, she was saved. Of course, the parents' troubles could not but affect the children, especially the elder daughter, who had just turned 9 at the time. Friends came to her birthday party, but right in the middle of the celebration, her dad suddenly left. As it turned out, he went to his mistress, with whom he had been having an affair for quite some time. John considered this relationship his outlet, as his drug-addicted wife only caused him disgust. It was only the children that kept him together with Julia. On the day of his daughter's birthday, the mistress came to pick up John right at their house. The wife saw her rival with her own eyes when she went outside to see where her husband had gone. John didn't seem to be bothered at all by the fact that his secret was out. Instead, these events came as a real shock to the younger Julie and her mother. The girl began to blame herself for what happened, as she simply could not comprehend the reasons for her father's behavior. From that moment on, Julie's grades at school, where she had been an excellent student, dropped to C's. Then her father decided to transfer her to another school in Kensington. In the new educational institution, the bright and attractive Julie quickly became popular, but also fell into bad company. Truancy began, and her grades worsened again. At that time, the girl was only 12, but her appearance already attracted the attention of many boys. An additional risk factor was that the Scully family lived in a disadvantaged area. The parents grew increasingly worried that Julie might follow in her mother's footsteps and also become addicted to illegal substances. Once, Julie invited her girlfriends for a sleepover, but when her mother came to check on them in the evening, her daughter was not in the room. The girls had simply run off to have fun. The frightened woman immediately called the police, and law enforcement officers eventually managed to find the schoolgirls in downtown Philadelphia. After this incident, the relationship between Julie and her mother became even more strained. Constant conflicts and quarrels turned into a common occurrence. The girl's rebellious spirit grew stronger, even affecting her relationship with her father. But since John was a cop, he always knew where and with whom his daughter was spending time. Noticing that his wife was not coping with raising the teenagers, the man decided to take custody of the children himself. The elder Julia was sent for treatment for drug addiction. While the mother was away from home, the atmosphere in the family was much calmer. Despite the younger Julie's sincere desire to please her father, youthful maximalism took over. The girl continued to spend a lot of time with friends, skipped school, and received poor grades. Upon learning about this, John became furious. At that time, Julie was 14 years old, and she directly told her father that she wanted to quit her studies. Perhaps such a protest was caused by a lack of parental attention and support. It should be noted that by that time, Julie had already turned into a real beauty and invariably found herself at the center of attention at any party. So it's not surprising that the girl preferred entertainment to trying to earn her father's approval. At 14, Julie had already begun her sexual life. In 1982, she graduated from high school, and her parents, of course, hoped that their daughter would pursue higher education. John, using his official position, arranged with the administration of an engineering school for Julie to be admitted outside the competition. The man insisted that his daughter, a Native American, should be given certain preferences. Eventually, his efforts paid off, and in the fall of 1983, the girl became a student at the educational institution her father had dreamed of. Julie's younger brother chose a different path in life. Despite growing up under identical conditions, as soon as he turned 16, the boy enlisted in the Navy. As for Julia, she decided that she had had enough. Shortly after entering the engineering school, she dropped out and got a job, striving for financial independence. Around the same time, the girl started a romance with Neil Ziegler, who was 6 years older than her. Their relationship developed rapidly, and already in November 1985, just a few months before Julie's 18th birthday, the couple got married. The marriage was kept secret even from the bride's own father. The union with an adult man brought Julie not only material well-being, but also emotional stability. When John finally found out about the secret wedding, he approved of his daughter's choice, believing that marriage would be better for her than living with a drug-addicted mother. But this marriage turned out to be short-lived in 1988. The couple divorced, and Julie was forced to return to her mother. At her new job, the girl did not even try to help her mom financially or pay for her own living expenses in her mother's house. Instead, Julie immersed herself in the world of beauty and entertainment. Her appearance was in full bloom at that time wherever this girl appeared. She invariably attracted admiring glances. Many considered Julie to be a professional model. Realizing the power of her charm, the young woman began to actively take advantage of her attractiveness. Despite her inner fragility and vulnerability, she desperately sought love, although she only found short-term affairs. Suitors swarmed around the beauty, inviting her on dates and to parties. In the summer of 1989, at a reception at a yacht club, Julie met Tim, a handsome man 11 years her senior. Tim owned a thriving landscaping business and could afford a luxurious lifestyle, including his own yacht. Back in the early 1980s, he founded his company, and since then, his career had been steadily on the rise, which was greatly facilitated by the boom in the U.S. real estate market. The romance between Julie and Tim developed stormily, and it almost immediately became apparent that the girl had a very jealous nature. Once, Tim met his secretary, with whom he had worked for more than a year, at a bar. Seeing them together, Julie attacked Tim's friend with her fists and smashed her lover's face. The girl didn't even listen to explanations that it was a purely business meeting. Later, the conflict was settled, but it became a vivid illustration of Julie's difficult temper. The girl had long dreamed of a modeling career, and then, in one of the newspapers, she came across an ad for a beauty contest. Julie became fired up with the idea of participating in the competition, and Tim was sure that his beloved would definitely win. The lover selected the most striking photos of the girl and sent them to the editorial office of the magazine organizing the contest. But after some time, it turned out that the contest was a fiction this way. The publishers simply lured gullible beauties in order to get spicy photos for the men's section on the last pages for free. Once, when visiting his office, Tim did not find his secretary at her desk. Instead, Julie was sitting there who, with a charming smile, informed him that the former assistant would not return. Just like that, without further ado, she simply took her lover's place, leaving him no choice but to accept her as an employee. This clever maneuver allowed Julie to work remotely from home, and at the same time provided financial independence and freedom of action. All this time, Julie did not stop monitoring the mail, hoping to receive a response from the magazine holding the beauty contest. But the expected letter never came, and this infuriated the girl. When she finally realized that she would not be awarded any prizes, she decided to act radically. Julie burst right into the editor-in-chief's office, shaking with rage. She demanded an explanation for why she had not yet received the award for her victory. In the end, the editor accepted her photos and promised to publish them in the next issue. The girl blabbed to everyone about her triumph and began actively preparing for the upcoming contest, which indeed took place sometime later in a posh hotel. 12 finalists attended this beauty competition, including Julie. But despite all her efforts, the judging panel gave preference to other participants. Only one jury member voted for our heroine. However, even this unfortunate incident had its positive side. Julie made friends with an editor named Cheryl. It was thanks to this acquaintance that the girl's photo made it onto the magazine's cover and on billboards hung all over the city. Such publicity brought Julie even more attention, and offers for modeling work poured in. By the fall of 1990, the girl had already become a local celebrity. This process was gaining tremendous momentum. Julie continued to work for Tim, but at the same time managed to win prizes at local beauty contests. True, she was met with failure on the serious runway. On November 16, 1991, the young couple got married. At that time, the bride had turned 23. The couple earned a good income and did not deny themselves anything. Julie's modeling career slowly moved upward until 1997, and her income grew accordingly. Later, the aspiring model appeared on television, but along with this, the girl began to abuse alcohol. The relationship with her husband resembled a roller coaster. UPS were replaced by Downs, although in general, love and understanding reigned between the spouses. Tim dreamed of children, especially since their financial situation quite allowed them to have kids. But Julie stubbornly postponed this issue, fearing that pregnancy and childbirth would ruin her modeling career, which was beginning to gain momentum. Nevertheless, in February 1995, Julie became pregnant. Her girlfriends claimed that the expectant mother continued to smoke and drink throughout her pregnancy. On November 26, 1996, a girl was born, whom they named Katie Scarlett. Motherhood completely turned Julie's life around, and she enthusiastically immersed herself in raising her firstborn. During this period, her own mother, the elder Julia, finally overcame her bad habits and actively helped her daughter take care of the baby. True, due to differences in views on parenting, arguments often flared up between the women. Meanwhile, the younger Julie was hit by postpartum depression, partly due to the loss of her perfect figure after pregnancy. She kind of withdrew into herself, not even trying to regain her former shape. Against this background, her relationship with Tim also began to deteriorate. Already in April 1997, the couple was forced to turn to a family psychotherapist. It seemed to Julie that the psychologist took her husband's side, although in fact, the specialist was trying to understand the girl's deep-seated problems and complexes, touching on painful memories of the past. As a result, he concluded that Tim paid too little time and attention to his wife, which led to a crisis in their marriage. Julie felt unbearably lonely, sought solace in communicating with friends, often returning home tipsy. In November 1997, the couple planned a traditional cruise, which they usually took every year since they got married. But this time, they decided to postpone the trip in order to celebrate Christmas on board the liner. The main purpose of this cruise was to improve the relationship between Julie and Tim, while their daughter was left in the care of her grandparents. On November 1st, the couple flew to San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico, where they boarded a cruise ship. Almost immediately, the spectacular and attractive Julie caught the attention of a young man named George Skiadopoulos, who held the lowest position in the ship's engineering department. But the next day, he introduced himself to the girl as the ship's captain. The guy even made a bet with a friend that he could get Julie into bed. George was only 22 at the time, had just graduated from college, and was just beginning his career. But despite this, the young man looked quite respectable and solid, so that Julie did not suspect any deception. The sly fellow lied to his new acquaintance that he was 28, and also bragged about a couple of his supposedly own achievements in order to impress her. Julie, who was 29 at the time, quickly became close to George. Tim saw them together a few times, but did not attach much importance to it. He was used to his wife's sociability and friendliness, as she often communicated with strangers, so he didn't even think to be jealous. On the eve of the party, the fake captain invited Julie on a tour of the engine room, which she readily agreed to. A spark ran between them, and the young people kissed, but nothing further happened for now. Upon returning home, an inspired Julie enthusiastically told her family's best friend Tony about her feelings. The girl was sure that the flash of passion would fade with initial speed, as she and George would never see each other again. But lo and behold, soon the supposed captain sent Julie a touching letter. The lovers switched to daily telephone communication. The secret admirer literally showered Julie with compliments, convincing her that Tim was not good enough for her. Tim knew about these conversations, as he accidentally overheard his wife cooing with someone on the phone a couple of times. But the man did not delve into the details of the conversations, fully trusting his better half. On the other hand, these secret relations completely baffled Julie. She seemed to be torn between the usual family comfort and a mad attraction to a young lover who gave her previously unknown acute sensations. The woman noticeably distanced herself from her husband and child, immersing herself in a whirlpool of new experiences. Tim saw that something wrong was happening and became worried. To strengthen the marriage, the man decided to arrange a lavish surprise party for Julie on the occasion of her 30th birthday. The celebration, which took place on January 3, 1998, was a great success. Julie's closest friends gathered at the birthday girl's house. As a gift, Julie persistently begged Tim for another cruise, and it had to be on a specific liner and at a strictly defined time. Of course, her main goal was to meet George. The husband resisted in every possible way, but eventually yielded to his wife's desire. And so on February 13th, the couple again went on a short trip. On board, Julie finally united with her chosen one, and George won the bet from his shipmates. Upon returning home, an inspired Julie could not stop telling stories about her spectacular love adventure. entrusting the most intimate details to the godfather of their daughter, Katie, the same family friend, Tony. But even for this devoted servant, it was unbearable to keep such a burden a secret, which the man later confessed to Julie. However, this did not stop her, and our heroine decided to secretly rush to Greece to see her beloved, whom she missed so much. For Tim and the family, she portrayed this trip as a family vacation, which she would allegedly go on with her mother and daughter. Julie confessed her real intentions to her mother, but, despite the condemnation, still insisted on her own. The first stage of this adventure assumed that the entire female Scully trio would go to Florida, but already on March 26, 1998, Julie left her mother and granddaughter and rushed to Puerto Rico, into the arms of her lover. There she immersed herself in a whirlpool of passion. Upon returning from her travels, Julie did not even think to hide her relationship with George from Tim. She hung on the phone around the clock, incessantly cooing with the Greek, sent him frank love messages by email, and shot videos about her life, which she also sent to her chosen one. And Julie did all this without hiding from her lawful husband, under the same roof with him and on his money. Moreover, having completely lost all fear, the woman again began to regularly frequent parties and get drunk senseless. Tim, of course, could not help but notice his wife's strange behavior. Hoping to save the family in the 7th year of their married life, he suggested that Julie visit a psychologist. But instead of gratitude during the very first session, she stated that she wanted a divorce. The stunned Tim flatly refused. The thing is, Julie owned a share in his business, which brought in about $1 million in profit annually. The woman desperately needed this money, as she planned to dash off to Greece with her daughter and settle there with her lover. Meanwhile, George had to undergo compulsory 20-month military service. Julie was bending over backward to help him escape to the States and get a visa, but she no longer had the money for it. Against the backdrop of all these emotional upheavals, Miss Scully began taking antidepressants. When George found out about this, he became terribly angry, strictly forbidding his beloved to take any medications. To please her chosen one, Julie undertook to get in shape. Suffering from insomnia, the girl constantly took sleeping pills and other serious drugs. At the same time, Julie exhausted herself with workouts, losing about 10 kilograms. She hoped to return to the modeling business and earn some money. But George turned out to be an even greater owner than Tim. He was terribly jealous and categorically did not approve of such intentions. As a result, the girl was forced to abandon this idea. None of Julie's relatives and friends supported her relationship with the Greek. Even Cheryl, who had once pumped up Scully in the modeling industry, openly condemned this romance. Meanwhile, the emotional state of our heroine was rapidly deteriorating. Once Tim asked his wife to give him access to business documents, but she locked the door to her room and didn't let anyone in. The police had to be called to take the papers necessary for work. And even this did not pacify the enraged Julie, who put up a frenzied resistance to law enforcement officers. At the same time, Julie developed paranoid delusions that her husband had allegedly hired a private detective to follow her. The atmosphere in the Scully house was heating up to the limit, and everything was heading towards an inevitable divorce. But while the family drama was approaching its climax, somewhere in the middle of summer, George and Julie met in the USA and secretly got engaged. The future Mrs. Skiadopoulos openly told everyone who would listen that she would soon move to Greece forever, but she hid the specific date from everyone according to the plan. This was to happen no earlier than next year. In the midst of these turbulent events, Tim received an itemized bill for his wife's international phone calls. The amount reached $6,000 to $7,000 a month. It was at that moment that the terrible truth finally dawned on the man. His wife was cheating on him with some ship engineer and had been maintaining contact with him behind her lawful husband's back for quite some time. The enraged Scully realized that he had had enough of feeding the ungrateful traitor, and he needed to get rid of all this lies as soon as possible and formalize the divorce. He frankly made all his claims to Julie. In response to the quite justified accusations, the offended wife stated that she was depriving Tim of the right to see his daughter. Julie dreamed of complete custody of Katie in order to go to another country with the little one without hindrance. Of course, these plans met with violent resistance from her husband. While the spouses were sorting out their relationship, a new interesting circumstance appeared. George informed his beloved that he was quitting his job and would personally come to visit her in New Jersey. Due to quarrels and conflicts with Tim, Julie reached the peak of an emotional crisis. the woman experienced inhuman stress, against the background of which she even began to lose her hair. But in Scully's clouded mind, all these troubles were explained solely by the forced separation from her beloved. At the same time, the girl rapidly developed paranoia. She was mortally jealous of George to all persons of the female sex without exception, and constantly demanded that her chosen one be in touch around the clock. But as soon as the Greek arrived in New Jersey, their crazy romance finally turned into complete madness. George, who had just lost his job, constantly asked Julie how much money she had, and openly incited his beloved to the most ridiculous expenses. In order to somehow pacify the insatiable suitor, the woman began to borrow money from her own husband. At the same time, Julie completely stopped communicating with her young daughter and had not seen her for several weeks. All this drove Tim crazy resentment, and anger almost tore him apart from the inside. And George, as if mocking, constantly lied to Julie about his supposedly outstanding achievements and huge profits. The absurdity of the situation was that this skinny, miserable-looking, slicked-back Greek with rotten teeth did not at all resemble a wealthy, handsome man from the modeling business or an influential businessman. However, Julie's behavior was an even bigger surprise. The woman desperately loved the unprepossessing jester, groveled before him, and was ready to give up everything she had, without regret, for the sake of this insidious manipulator. Friends and family tried in every possible way to dissuade Scully from this outright madness. They sincerely could not understand how one could lose their head over an objectively unattractive, unemployed loser without certain life prospects, who was also known for his mendacity, jealousy, and propensity for violence. However, Julie seemed to have been seized by a love fever. She nurtured crazy plans about how she would spend all the money received after the divorce on an expensive hair transplant for her bald admirer, and then take care of his teeth. Tim, having learned about these wild plans of his wife, went berserk with rage. He was especially outraged by the fact that Julie was ready to involve their innocent daughter in this adventure. Scully threatened the traitor that in case Katie disappeared, he would personally see to it that the beloved daughter would never see her mother again. It seems that this promise somewhat cooled the ardor of the stubborn mistress. At least Julie herself began to tell her friends that her affair with the Greek was over. But it took only a few weeks before Scully once again dashed off with George to Greece, supposedly to test the strength of their feelings. During this trip, the woman met the pseudo-captain's parents and was completely delighted with them. It's just that, given the religiosity of her chosen one's family, Julie was forced to hide from her future relatives the existence of her daughter, her former marriage, and her modeling career. And upon returning home and from absolutely everyone else, Scully only dreamed of a life together with her beloved in fabulous Hellas. On December 6th, the day when Julie was to leave the house she still shared with Tim forever, the woman left her daughter in the care of her husband and moved to a hotel. There, Scully swallowed handfuls of psychotropic drugs and prepared to fly to Greece. Already on December 8, 1998, the lady who was head over heels in love landed in Athens. It was in this country that George and Julie planned to have a wedding and begin a new carefree life. Almost immediately after his beloved's arrival, the Greek persuaded her to open a joint bank account. Allegedly, his chosen one did not know the local language and in general was not very good with finances. Blinded by passion, Miss Scully unreservedly trusted her liberator. Without a shadow of a doubt, she put all her savings, $80,000 in cash, into their joint account. And Julie gave her beloved another $18,000 for minor household expenses. This money was the last funds that the woman had at her disposal at that time. And soon she simply disappeared without a trace. On January 8th, Skiadopoulos called his fiancée's best American friend with terrible news: Julie had gone missing. According to the Greek, they had agreed to have a snack at a local McDonald's, but the girl never showed up for the meeting. George allegedly waited for her for several hours, but it was all in vain. And since mobile communications did not exist at that time, he had no way to inform his beloved of his concern. Eventually, after a long and unsuccessful search, the grief-stricken groom turned to the police with a statement about the disappearance of Julie Scully. Shortly before George's alarming message about Julie's disappearance, her closest friend in the States received a call from Scully herself. In the conversation, the woman admitted that she terribly missed her daughter Katie and had some problems in her relationship with her fiancé. From what was said, the friend concluded that Julie was about to leave the Greek and should return home in the near future. However, time passed, but Mrs. Scully never appeared on the doorstep of her family home. Against this background, the news from George about her friend's mysterious disappearance caused sincere horror and concern. The pseudo-captain relayed that on the day of the disappearance, Julie left her passport in the car, which was later somehow confiscated by the police. The biggest problem was that Skiadopoulos allegedly could not find the law enforcement officer who took the document in any way. This whole story sounded extremely suspicious, so the friend eventually decided to call Tim Scully, who was the only one who could help sort out the situation. The man immediately realized that his ex was in big trouble. Tim recalled that the last time Julie personally reached out to relatives in the USA was on January 7th, and since then, there had been no news of her. Around the same time, the mother of the missing woman told her son-in-law that Skiadopoulos gave the impression of a worthless and disgusting type. Besides being an unpleasant subject by nature, the Greek obviously did not keep himself in check at all. The elder Julia once witnessed with her own eyes how George attacked her daughter during a quarrel, and when the woman stood up for her child, the enraged Greek attacked her. He yelled, swore like a trooper, and then grabbed the old woman by the throat and pressed his mother-in-law against the wall with all his might. The inhuman man did not let go of the victim until she threatened to call the police. After that incident, Julie allegedly tried to break up with the sadist. She even called law enforcement, after which Skiadopoulos was deported from the country. But despite everything, after some time, the girl once again rushed after her beloved to Greece. Moreover, Julie justified this scum in every possible way, taking the blame for the incident upon herself. So Scully's mother had no doubt that this scoundrel George was definitely involved in her daughter's disappearance. However, Skiadopoulos himself tirelessly portrayed himself as an innocent lamb and provided the Greek police with all possible assistance in the search for his bride. Julia's relatives tried to contact the U.S. Embassy in Athens in parallel. Unfortunately, cooperation with the Hellenistic cops was significantly hampered by the language barrier. Not a single law enforcement officer involved in the search for the missing American woman spoke English. Then the FBI finally intervened in the case. Almost immediately, the feds found out that Julie's passport had actually been with George all these days. The Greek initially assured that he found the document much later, and when he learned about the FBI's interest in the case, he stated that the papers were simply stolen. The behavior of the main suspect seemed increasingly strange with each passing day. For example, Skiadopoulos even tried to withdraw money from his joint account with Julie, but for some reason, he failed. On January 23, 1999, the ill-fated couple was supposed to have a wedding. Instead, all the country's news TV channels and radio stations were flooded with one topic: a young woman from the USA who had gone missing. And George went berserk and threw a tantrum when he found out that his bride's closest American friend had also intervened in the publicity of this story. He screamed into the telephone receiver about his non-involvement and even made several statements to the press. The frightened Greek gave numerous interviews to various media in which he desperately tried to justify himself and prove his complete innocence. But all these efforts were in vain. Just 16 days after the disappearance of Julie Scully, George found himself in the investigator's office as the main suspect. At first, he stubbornly retold law enforcement the same fairy tales that he had been weaving for the media. However, it took less than 4 hours of painstaking work before the suspect cracked and confessed to the murder of his beloved. Skiadopoulos insisted that it was a terrible accident. It seemed that the man really regretted what he had done, because he wept throughout the interrogation. But very quickly, this story was overgrown with a whole bunch of new, absurd, and frankly false details. Getting confused in his testimony, George either convinced the cops that Julie had never disappeared at all, then again admitted his guilt, then once again renounced any crime. Eventually, the Greek gave the following story. Allegedly, shortly after moving to Greece, Julie became very disappointed in both the country itself and her chosen one. Every day she unbearably missed her home, little daughter, usual life, and longed to return to America immediately. George claimed that he tried in every possible way to console and calm his beloved, but he failed. Every day, Julie's depression only deepened. On one of the last days before the disappearance, Scully simply could not stop the flow of tears and rushed to flee from Hellas with all her might. Additionally, the situation was aggravated by the fact that around the same time, the future mother-in-law found out about the existence of her son's fiancé's ex-wife and child. From that moment on, Georges' mother completely stopped hiding her disdain for her son's chosen one and openly advised him to get rid of this adventuress as soon as possible. On this basis, they had such violent conflicts with their son that the couple was even evicted from the hotel room once. At the same time, George found nothing better than to vent all his anger on Julie. He was jealous of her, forbade her to call relatives, and most importantly, regularly severely beat her. Later, it became known that Schedopoulos himself most likely inherited mental disorders from his schizophrenic mother. At the very least, the Greek was distinguished by a clearly inflated self-esteem, which with his repulsive appearance, manifested itself in ugly arrogance and selfishness. George demonstrated the talent of a manipulator, as the relatives and friends of the deceased later told.
And at the slightest disagreement, he attacked Julie with his fists. By the way, the elder Julia was not the first and not the only victim of the Greek's beating. There is documentary evidence of at least one more of his attacks, once the psychopath almost tore off Scully's arm. However, even then the woman covered for her tormentor, justifying herself to everyone that she was injured by accident.
And despite all this horror, she continued to live with the tormentor under the same roof. It was against this eerie background that the events of January 8, 1999 took place. It was then that the couple went on a long car trip to Athens. The road along which the lover's car was winding was practically deserted, a typical section of the Greek outback with 2 lanes and not a soul around. Later, another fierce quarrel broke out between Julie and George. The enraged Schedopoulos abruptly swerved onto the side of the road and braked in a hiding place where the passengers in the cabin could not be noticed by other road users. Emptiness, silence, and darkness reigned around. The Greek, devoid of human features, jumped out of the car, and a moment later, with an inhuman roar, attacked Julie, clasping his beloved's neck with his hands. The inhuman man squeezed her throat with inhuman force, seeking only one thing to stifle the cries and pleas of his victim as soon as possible. Later, during interrogation, the killer confessed to the cops that at that fatal moment, he seemed to be watching his own atrocities from the side, unable to control either the situation or himself. According to Schedopoulos, the sadist simply could not come to his senses in time and let go of Julie while she was still showing at least some signs of life. George assured the investigation that this whole nightmare lasted only a few seconds. However, forensic experts knew well that strangulation requires at least 23 minutes of continuous neck compression. After all he had done, the killer, according to his own testimony, almost lost his mind. At first, he allegedly wanted to burn the mutilated body of his beloved and scatter her ashes over the sea from a cliff, and then jump down himself to reunite with Julie after death. But in the end, he never dared to take this step. However, given the place where Georges' story took place, the interrogation room, the investigators did not really believe his sweet tales about a suicide attempt. Judging by everything, after the murder, Schedopoulos did not even think about following his beloved to the other world. At that interrogation, the Greek muttered something about unsuccessful attempts to shoot himself with an air gun, throw himself under the wheels of a truck, and swallow a deadly dose of medicines. But all these masterfully invented plans were never implemented probably. The psychopath was simply afraid, which is why he changed his mind. The reality was much more horrible and eerie. According to the killer's own confession, the first thing he did was shove the bloodless body of his beloved into the trunk of the car, drive to the nearest gas station, fill up a full tank, and return to the scene of the crime. After that, Schedopoulos dragged the bloody Julie into a field. Away from the road, it was there that 2 small lakes were visible. Without thinking twice, the beast doused the tortured girl with fuel and set her on fire. However, a sudden rain extinguished the fire, so the body was only partially burned, although George even considered the option of simply drowning the disfigured remains in the nearest lake. In the end, he decided it was better to put the charred corpse back in the trunk. This time, the sadist drove in the opposite direction, to his grandmother's house. There in the pantry, the maniac found a huge suitcase in which he planned to place Julie's remains. But the so-called rigor mortis stood in the way, as a result of which the tortured body stiffened and did not want to bend. And it was also impossible to shove the dead woman's head into the suitcase. So George took it in cold blood and personally cut Scully's head. Grabbing the severed part by the hair, the killer raised it to the level of his eyes. Later, during interrogation, the Greek confessed to the investigators that at that moment, Genuine horror was visible in Julie's dead pupils. However, even after death, the girl seemed incredibly beautiful to him. So as a farewell, the psychopath passionately kissed the bloody lips of his lifeless bride. After these disgusting manipulations, Schiodopolis packed the mutilated torso into a suitcase, burned it, and threw the charred remains into the middle of the nearest swamp. But George decided to keep Julie's severed head as a creepy trophy. Later, he still got rid of it by throwing it from a high bank into the sea. The girl's body was found only 19 days after her disappearance, and not anywhere else, but at the very place of the murder, where law enforcement officers were brought personally by George, who was already imprisoned at that time. The widow of the deceased, Tim Scully, flew to Greece to identify his wife with his own eyes and settle all the formalities for transporting her mutilated remains to her homeland. But even with this, the terrible story of Julie did not end. A scandal broke out around the case after scandal. For example, George suddenly decided to publicly call himself a murderer, repeating his confession live on Greek television. Upon hearing this, the suspect's mother had a stroke, and his grandmother had an acute nervous breakdown. Meanwhile, Tim's father asked the police in surprise why Schiodopolis was allowed to live after such a brutal murder. In his opinion, the sadist should have committed suicide immediately after the deed. Instead, frankly cynical publications began to appear in some media outlets, which placed all the blame for the tragedy on the victim herself. However, the official authorities of Greece recognized this crime as almost the most terrible in the country's history. And from the very first days of the process, George's defenders took as a basis the version of the client's insanity, referring to hereditary schizophrenia, which allegedly passed to him from his mother. But despite this, the killer himself begged the court in despair for the highest measure of punishment. True, in Greece, the death penalty is not provided for even the most serious crimes, so theoretically, Schiodopolis faced a maximum of life imprisonment. While the executioner was fighting for his life, Tim Scully turned out to be the only reliable support for everyone who knew and loved his late wife. Despite the betrayal he experienced, in the most difficult days, the man proved to be an amazingly kind and noble person. It was to Tim that Julie's best friends handed over a diary of memories about her, which their daughter Katie was supposed to read in a few years, and the relatives of the deceased sincerely hoped that the Greek had initially set his sights on Mrs. Scully solely for the money. They say the groom somehow found out about Tim's financial situation, which is why he decided to marry his wife. Perhaps the subsequent judicial division of property was just the main goal of the psychopath. But as soon as George realized that Julie was not going to invest the money obtained from her husband in the Greek's dubious business projects, he immediately brutally dealt with the recalcitrant passion. Be that as it may, the trial of Julie Scully's killer began on November 27, 1999. Less than a year after the tragedy. Unlike the USA, Greek legal proceedings do not provide for the participation of a jury in the process. Usually such a case is considered by a panel of 3 professional servants of Themis, which significantly speeds up the course of justice. True, in the case of Schiodopolis, there was not a single representative of the defense on the witness stand. As a result, the accused gave very lengthy testimony, which lasted about 5 hours, and already on December 6th, the court found 24-year-old George Schiodopolis guilty on all counts of the indictment. The sadistic killer was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to early release. But the surprises of Greek justice did not end there. In 2002, the life prisoner filed an appeal against the sentence, stating that at the time of Julia's murder, he was in a state of insanity. This time, the lawyers managed to convince the judges of the validity of their position. Schiodopolis' life term was replaced by 23 years with the right to apply for parole. Thanks to this decision, already in 2007, the psychopath was released early and returned to his hometown of Kavala. The killer still lives there, surrounded by his new family. It's even scary to imagine whether George's current neighbors and acquaintances have any idea what this imposing man who once cold-bloodedly cut off his own bride's head is capable of. We sincerely hope that the fate of Julie Scully has not left you indifferent. Some crimes remain unsolved for years, even decades. Case files gather dust in police archives while the perpetrators continue living their lives, starting families and enjoying freedom, a privilege their victims are deprived of. Today, I'll tell you about a killer who managed to evade justice for over a decade and a half. But even he ultimately faced retribution. Rebecca Good was born on April 28, 1982 in the small town of Melbourne, Kansas, USA. With a population of barely 2,000 people, she was one of 4 daughters in the family. When the children were still very young, their parents decided to divorce. The process proved extremely unpleasant for all family members. The father made every effort to gain custody of his daughters, but the court sided with the mother. Despite the difficulties in separation, all the sisters maintained a relationship with their father. They were very close to each other and always took care of one another. As a teenager, Rebecca enrolled in a community college in Arkansas. To live closer to her place of study, she moved to the largest city of Fayetteville, with a population of around 100,000. Here, the girl pursued her education, worked part-time jobs, and prepared to enter university. Rebecca settled into an apartment with her younger sister Danielle, who was also her best friend. A couple weeks after moving, the sisters returned to their hometown of Melbourne to spend time with family and friends. 22-year-old Rebecca, after visiting with relatives, drove Danielle to her boyfriend's house and then went to see her own boyfriend Casey. At that point, they had been dating for about a year. Casey lived in a trailer located on his parents' property. They all had a wonderful weekend together. And then, little by little, they began getting ready to return to their usual work routines. On the morning of Monday, September 20, 2004, Rebecca drove her boyfriend to his job at a fast food restaurant. After that, the girl was seen buying breakfast. Rebecca stopped by a store where she ordered coffee and a sandwich. She planned to pack her things to head back home, where she and her sister were studying. Returning to her boyfriend's trailer, the girl decided to take a little nap, feeling exhausted after an almost sleepless night. Around noon, Rebecca was supposed to pick up Danielle from her boyfriend's place, but the younger sister waited in vain for the older one. The girl assumed Rebecca's plans had changed, so by evening she made her own way to their parents' house. There she gathered some things for the trip and went to bed. The next morning, Danielle hoped to meet her older sister, but she never returned. The girl called Casey, but he hadn't spent the night at home and knew nothing about his girlfriend's whereabouts. The young man was certain Rebecca was long home by now. Other friends and acquaintances also denied seeing her. Hoping to find out if something had happened to her sister, Danielle called the sheriff's department. She reported that the girl had gone missing a little less than 24 hours ago. The police were immediately interested in what happened. Investigators began working through possible scenarios, gathering information from the reporting party. After talking to her, they decided to speak with the last person who saw Rebecca before she disappeared. The police went to Casey's workplace, the missing girl's boyfriend, since he was the last one to see Rebecca. However, the young man told law enforcement that the night before he had stayed at a friend's house, and in the morning he went straight to work. He knew the girl was supposed to leave with her sister and wasn't expecting her to return. But the detectives were alarmed by Casey's decision, especially considering he had a dog that needed care. The young man couldn't leave it for long, although there was someone on his parents' property to look after the animal. The police had no evidence to confirm their suspicions, but investigators still decided to inspect the trailer where the missing girl's boyfriend lived. They requested his consent to search. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they immediately noticed Rebecca's car parked nearby. Inside the trailer, there was a sharp smell of bleach. All the missing girl's things were in place. Her purse, money, cell phone, even the breakfast she bought, the coffee and sandwich, remained untouched. It seemed as if the student hadn't gone anywhere at all. Even her dog, a Pomeranian, was there, which she definitely couldn't have left unattended for long. In the bedroom, the police noticed the heavily crumpled bedding. The duvet was found in the washing machine with traces of blood. A bottle of bleach stood by the bed. Detectives looked under the mattress and saw large fresh red stains on it. Obviously, someone had recently flipped it over, trying to hide these traces. After this discovery, law enforcement's suspicions only strengthened. An examination showed that the blood on the mattress and bedding belonged to the missing girl. Casey became the main suspect in Rebecca's disappearance and probable murder, given the amount of blood found in his trailer. However, several colleagues and the young man's management confirmed that on the day of the disappearance, at 8 a.m., the girl had dropped him off at work. She was whole and unharmed, after which she went about her business and didn't return. The young man worked until 4:30 p.m., and when his shift ended, friends picked him up in a car. This was seen by several witnesses. Casey went to the movies with his buddies for an evening showing, and then they headed straight to one of the friends' houses. The tired young man went to bed and didn't get up until the morning of September 21. From there, he went directly to the fast food restaurant. The friend also confirmed Casey's alibi. It seemed the young man had solid proof of his non-involvement, so there were no grounds for arrest. But investigators still didn't completely rule him out as a suspect. They continued carefully examining the crime scene. All the girl's things remained in the trailer, with the exception of the suitcase she usually took with her on trips. Police suspected that the body could have been hidden in it. Another interesting detail was the absence of one of the legs of the piano that stood in the trailer. According to Casey, this leg had long been loose and would fall off if you bumped the instrument, but he didn't know where it had gone. Maybe it rolled somewhere. Among the versions regarding Rebecca's disappearance, the possibility of her running off with her ex-boyfriend Justin was also considered. The police contacted him, but the young man assured that he had not seen the missing girl and had not maintained any relationship with her for a long time. Meanwhile, the search for Rebecca continued, and a week later, law enforcement received alarming news. On September 27, 2004, the body of the 22-year-old student was found in a ravine near the road. A random witness came across a pit formed by a mound, at the bottom of which lay the dead girl. The victim of the brutal attack was wearing only a t-shirt and underwear. During the autopsy, the medical examiner determined that Rebecca had died about a week ago. This meant that it was on Monday, September 20, after she dropped her boyfriend off at work, that an unknown criminal attacked and killed her. The girl received 2 separate blows to the head with a blunt object. The first broke her nose, and the second was fatal, fracturing her skull. Numerous bruises were found on Rebecca's body, indicating a brutal beating. Interestingly, the shape of the injuries matched the mark that could have been left by the broken leg of the piano, which was not found in Casey's trailer. It was considered the murder weapon, but this piece of evidence could not be found next to the body. The medical examiner found no signs of resistance, so the girl apparently did not expect the attack. So the attack on her was committed by someone she knew, or she was attacked from behind. There were also no signs of sexual assault, so that was not the motive for the crime. Among Rebecca's injuries, a fracture of the hyoid bone was recorded, indicating prolonged and forceful strangulation. After the body was discovered, law enforcement again turned their attention to Casey. Witnesses reported that the girl had long wanted to break up with him, considering the young man to be the main cause of problems in the relationship. His possessive attitudes provoked most of the conflicts, which only intensified after Rebecca moved to another city to study. However, Casey had a reliable alibi. Nevertheless, detectives and many local residents were convinced that he was guilty of the brutal attack, since the murder took place in his house. Investigators desperately tried to link Casey to this tragedy, so they carefully checked all the information about him. But at every stage, the young man had confirmation of his alibi. He was seen by colleagues at work. Benny spent time with friends. There were tickets and payment receipts left. The next morning, Casey showed up at work again and spent the whole day there. His alibi ruled out the possibility of him committing any criminal acts against Rebecca, with whom he couldn't even have crossed paths, unless he slipped away from work unnoticed, but detectives considered that probability too low. Casey worked in a fast food restaurant, constantly in plain sight, so his absence would have been noticed immediately. It was assumed that the girl could have been attacked not on Monday morning, but on Sunday evening, when the young man had no alibi. But here too a contradiction arose. Eyewitnesses claimed that it was Rebecca who brought her boyfriend to work in her car on Monday morning. Moreover, she then stopped by the store to buy breakfast, where she was also seen. The salesman remembered the girl buying a sandwich and a donut, which were later found in her boyfriend's trailer. This confirmed that the employee was not mistaken. So the version about the attack on Sunday had to be quickly discarded. Everything indicated that Rebecca returned to the trailer, and it was there or somewhere nearby that she was attacked. After all her things remained inside, but no signs of a break-in were found in the dwelling, which meant that the girl most likely opened the door herself to someone she knew, or the door wasn't locked at all. Of course, after Casey, other members of his family who lived on the property where the trailer stood fell under suspicion. They all could have communicated and seen the girl, in fact had free access to the young man's home. But it turned out that the father of the family was out of town during that period. He worked as a truck driver and was on an intercity route. Casey's siblings also provided alibis that were quickly confirmed. It turned out that none of his relatives living on the property could have attacked the girl. Meanwhile, the police continued to communicate with the main suspect, Casey, trying to find out new details about the last days of Rebecca's life. The young man admitted that on Sunday evening he saw his cousin, 27-year-old William Miller. He was passing by and stopped for a few minutes at the driveway to talk. Although the visit was brief, investigators latched onto this information. Everything indicated that the victim knew her killer, and it could have been anyone. It became known that William had come to town to help his mother move back from Texas. He arrived that same evening and was in the city during the period of the girl's disappearance, which looked suspicious. Could William have had a motive for committing the crime? To get more information, detectives spoke with him, but couldn't find out anything new. He only confirmed talking to his cousin on Sunday evening, after which he left without seeing Rebecca. Another suspect was a girl named Jenny Fertner, who had long been at odds with Rebecca over her ex-boyfriend Justin. But this time, too, the police failed to find evidence of her involvement in the attack. At the time of the murder, she had a reliable alibi. Gathering information about the last days of the deceased's life, detectives learned that she had met with a guy named J.B. Etsy. There was no romantic relationship between them, but the young man sold her marijuana, for which she owed him $20. Investigators thought he might well have been involved in the murder over money. But during the conversation with him, nothing suspicious was found. The guy claimed that he would never have killed a young girl, even for an amount many times greater than the $20 debt. He successfully passed a polygraph test, so he was released. Another person investigators spoke to was Chris Cantrell. There were several witnesses who claimed he had bragged about an attack on a young student. Of course, the detectives were immediately interested in him. But during interrogation at the police station, Chris denied these claims, and the witnesses with their contradictory statements could not be found. After checking this man, he was released for lack of evidence. Moreover, he had an alibi. After this episode, the investigation reached a dead end. Despite public anxiety and pressure from the victim's relatives, the process stalled and did not move forward for several years. During this time, Rebecca's parents constantly reminded about themselves, repeatedly asking for police documents on the case. But they were refused. Eventually, the parents hired a private detective, hoping he could shed light on the circumstances of their daughter's tragic death. But even the professional failed to uncover new details of the bloody attack. Rebecca's relatives even announced a $25,000 reward for information that would help find the killer. But even this did not move the investigation from a dead end. Only in the late 2010s did the case unexpectedly receive a new impetus. Several podcasts covered the girl's brutal murder, drawing public attention to the unsolved crime. In 2018, another episode dedicated to Rebecca's death was released. The host, who was originally from the area, invited the deceased's relatives and friends to talk. They shared their versions of what could have happened. During the interview, one of the witnesses provided shocking information. He personally heard Casey bragging about killing Rebecca. According to this person, they worked together, and one time, when the young man got drunk, he confessed to the deed. But the credibility of this testimony was in doubt. First, Casey's confession allegedly took place 8 years ago, when he was intoxicated. Moreover, the witness was also under the influence. And despite all this, for some reason he did not report what he heard to the police. It's quite possible that his story for the podcast was just an attempt to attract attention to himself, to get publicity. In addition, it turned out that this witness's wife had an affair with Casey, so the man could just be looking for a way to get back at his rival. However, even this dubious information forced detectives to return to the investigation and take up the case with renewed vigor. In 2020, a new special agent with the Arkansas State Police was ordered to reopen the investigation into Rebecca's murder. He decided to start from scratch. First of all, he interrogated everyone who could have been involved in the crime. During numerous conversations, the investigator only confirmed the old alibis. And suddenly it turned out that the only person who was in Casey's trailer shortly before Rebecca's death and had no alibi was his cousin William Miller. The police had spoken to him back in 2004, but at the time he denied any involvement in the murder. Since then, William had been completely forgotten about. But it turned out that over the years he had divorced his wife and moved to the Philippines. There he got into a relationship with another woman, with whom he started a new family and had 2 children. In the Philippines, William owned a large farm of about 12 hectares, where the family raised livestock and tended plantations that provided them with a livelihood. The couple's older son spoke English quite well, while the younger daughter knew only a few phrases, preferring the local Bisaya language. William himself worked in the oil industry and taught at the School of Equatorial Hygiene. The police suspected that his life abroad was actually related to an attempt to avoid paying taxes. After all, although he was an employee of a North American company, being outside the United States, he did not have to pay taxes. So William constantly shuttled between the Philippines, West Africa, and the United States. He visited his homeland to see relatives, get treatment, and periodically appeared at the office of the oil company he worked for. In any case, the new investigator who took over the investigation was eager to talk to this suspicious man. Unfortunately, due to his constant traveling, it was not easy to contact him. The detective had to be patient and wait for William's return. Intuition told him that Casey's cousin might know more about the brutal attack of 2004 than he had told at the time. Back in 2019, several journalists created a social media group dedicated to this unsolved crime. Interestingly, William joined it quite quickly. Of course, he had no idea that he was under the close attention of the police, because the details of the reopened investigation were kept secret. William's name did not appear in any of the podcasts, and no one outside considered him a suspect. He was a little-known member of Casey's family, with whom few people communicated closely. Therefore, this person was simply forgotten about, but for detectives, he had long been on the list of potential criminals. On the day of the murder, William had been in town for several days, helping his mother move, and in fact had access to Casey's trailer. It was this fact that caught the attention of the new investigator, and also the fact that shortly after the crime, the suspect left the country, which also looked strange. When William joined the social media group, he immediately aroused the interest of other members. The fact is that all the subscribers knew each other, had their own close-knit community, and then suddenly a man who lived so far away in the Philippines and could hardly know anything about this case joined, so his excessive interest seemed suspicious. At the same time, William demonstrated a surprisingly good knowledge of the circumstances of the murder, was literally obsessed with this topic, time after time commenting on the details of the student's death, sending newspaper clippings and eyewitness accounts that other group members did not have access to and which had not yet been made public. Community subscribers claimed that William talked about the place where the girl's body was found and also shared his suspicions that Casey's neighbors were involved in the crime. This greatly alarmed the other members of the group. One of the girls, who was well versed in genealogy, analyzed the information and found that William was the cousin of the deceased's boyfriend. This discovery caused alarm in everyone. After considering the situation, the community members decided to pass the collected information to the Arkansas State Police. Law enforcement officials were interested in this information. William's behavior his joining the group, his obsessive discussion of the murder theme resembled the actions of a criminal who monitors the progress of the investigation and tries to lead the investigation in the wrong direction. But the police's hands were tied because the suspect was in another country and there was no way to interrogate him. Although there was an extradition agreement between the USA and the Philippines, more compelling grounds were needed to extradite a person. All that remained was to wait for William to return to the States on his own. In order not to miss his arrival, law enforcement officials warned the customs services. The man's passport was entered into the appropriate database. It was assumed that the system would automatically report his appearance at the border, and then customs officers would quickly contact the police. And so it happened. In October 2020, William flew to Arkansas to visit his family, who now lived there. The detective learned of his arrival. When police called the suspect's mother, she assured that her son had not appeared in the country for over a year. But this was a lie because law enforcement officials already knew that he had crossed the U.S. border. Later, the woman explained her insincerity by the fact that she did not believe in the conversation with the police and thought that some ill wishes of William were trying to find him. Eventually, the police managed to arrange a meeting with William at the station on November 7, which he attended. Finding himself in the interrogation room, the suspect immediately declared his readiness to cooperate and provide any information necessary for the investigation. He assured that he had nothing to hide. Despite the fact that the man was suspected of murder, the detectives initially decided not to focus on this. The conversation began casually, from afar, with innocent questions in order to win over the suspect and give him the opportunity to open up. At first, the investigators were interested in William's current life and his frequent moves. He talked about his busy schedule and life, gradually relaxing. Further, the detectives showed interest in his work, place of residence and daily routine at the time of Rebecca's murder. William reported that he was then working on a 7-on-7-off schedule, that is, a week of 10-12 hours a day, and then the same amount of rest. Shortly before the tragic death of the student, his mother moved from Arkansas to Texas, and he helped her with the move. But she did not like the new state, so the woman decided to return back. William used one of his weeks off to help his mother return home. That is why he found himself in the city during the period when Rebecca Good was murdered. The police gradually approached the most important questions. It turned out that William was not very close to his cousins, although they occasionally met and communicated. According to him, he had been to his cousin's trailer only a few times, but did not remember this happening in 2004. Then the police tried to clarify the circumstances of William's meeting with Casey in September 2004. He confirmed that he did visit him while living in the house with his mother. According to the suspect, he had little communication with his cousin because he was constantly working. William saw him and the girl only in the evening, and it seemed to him as if they had some kind of quarrel. However, this aroused even more suspicion, because the young people's loved ones claimed that they did not quarrel that evening. William said that he had been to his cousin's trailer several times, but did not mention to the police about communicating with him on September 19, the day before Rebecca's death. He kept silent about this until the very end, and the detectives also did not tell him about their awareness. They tried to lead the suspect to a confession. According to William, he arrived in Kansas only on the evening of Sunday, September 19, when it was already getting dark, and stayed with his mother. In the morning, they took his younger brother to school together, and then spent the whole day packing things. On Tuesday, William rented several trucks for the move. It was during this period that police officers who came to search began working around his cousin's trailer. But he never mentioned seeing Casey and Rebecca. After that, the detectives told about their awareness of the communication between Casey and William on September 19, 2004. However, the suspect began to deny that he did not remember exactly and suggested that this meeting took place at a different time. The detectives continued to maintain a relaxed atmosphere and asked the man to provide DNA samples. He immediately refused, explaining that his DNA could have remained on the furniture items during his cousin's visit. The detectives explained to William that they would compare the DNA not with samples from the furniture, but with specific physical evidence from the crime scene. But they still could not convince him. In fact, no DNA of the killer was found at the crime scene, so the detectives just wanted to check his reaction. At the same time, the suspect agreed to take a polygraph test. Before the test began, he was clearly nervous. William claimed that he was taking medications that affected his blood pressure, so he was afraid of the low accuracy of the results. However, in reality, such problems do not affect the effectiveness of the test, which he was informed about. The polygraph examiner managed to calm the suspect down, but this did not help him successfully pass the test. William failed the polygraph, which automatically increased the police's suspicions. The interrogation continued. The investigators were determined to break the suspect. To do this, they used the same tactic that they used on Casey in the first year after the girl's murder. Then they photographed his car and tried to convince the young man that Rebecca's blood was found on the gas pedal. Of course, this was a trick to get the criminal to give himself away, but it didn't work with Casey. He continued to argue that it was possible, so the police assumed that the young man was indeed innocent. To pull the same thing on William, they had to track down and photograph his old pickup truck, which he owned at the time of the crime. When the police played the same trick, informing him that Rebecca's blood was found on the pedal of his car, it worked. The man suddenly began to stutter, get confused in his testimony. He was even more nervous, and his story instantly changed. As soon as the suspect believed that Rebecca's blood was found in his old car, he said that on the day of the crime he saw an unknown young man. He arrived in a white car, which he left near the back porch of the house. William saw the suspicious man quickly disappear from the scene alone, and he thought that his cousin's trailer had been robbed. When he ran inside to make sure of this, he saw not the consequences of a robbery, but blood on the bedding. In his opinion, Rebecca was attacked and kidnapped, and then probably killed. Of course, the detectives could not believe it, because according to his confession, the criminal acted alone. Moreover, there was no reason to hide this information for 16 years. When he was exposed in a lie, William stated that he was ready to confess. According to him, on Monday morning he went hunting in the woods behind his grandfather's house. He knocked on the trailer where Rebecca was and asked to use the phone. Suspecting nothing, the girl let him in. However, this was a trick because he wanted to hunt for more interesting prey Rebecca. He was very nervous, so he accidentally touched the piano, and its leg broke off and fell. Then he grabbed the girl and beat her half to death, and then strangled her with golf clubs to make sure she was dead. After the massacre, he packed the body in a suitcase. He cleaned up the crime scene, collected the bloody bedding, sent some of it to the laundry. He turned the mattress over,
took the body out in his pickup truck and threw it into a ravine. Moreover, on the way, he drove past the police station, not even afraid that he might be noticed or accidentally stopped. On the way back, he got rid of the piano leg and suitcase, indicating the place. The criminal just continued to live as if nothing had happened. He returned home in such a way that his mother did not even notice her son's absence while packing things. Then they made the move as planned. The motives for the brutal murder of Rebecca remained a mystery. William categorically denied any intentions to abuse the girl. Valuables were also not stolen from the crime scene. The suspect claimed that it was a spontaneous attack of aggression that got out of control. According to him, Rebecca did not provoke or offend him in any way, so there were no obvious reasons for the attack. William just wanted to shed someone else's blood. For a long time, the police were puzzled by one question. Why did William, having arrived in the Philippines and learning from his mother about the officer's call, not run away, but agreed to meet with the detectives? The man admitted that for many years he had been lying to everyone about this incident in order to make sure of his inviolability. He was absolutely sure that his involvement in the crime could not be proven. Therefore, without any hesitation, William appeared at the police station, hoping to finally remove all suspicions from himself and live carefree on. When the suspect was finally exposed, the investigators decided to use another cunning trick. The criminal acted too confidently, methodically, and accurately. There was a suspicion that William might have other crimes behind him. The detectives hinted to him that they were aware of his involvement in a number of other murders. Surprisingly, this tactic worked. As it turned out, this seemingly ordinary family man and father was a real serial killer. According to William himself, he took the life of his first victim at the age of 20. Since then, the man had constantly stalked pretty blonde girls, whom he brutally beat and strangled to death. Police officers unfolded a map of the area in front of the suspect. William, without hesitation, marked several points on it where, according to him, the bodies of the dead girls could be found. In total, he indicated 6 burial sites of the victims. 4 of them, according to the killer, were girls of easy virtue, and 2 were random passers by whom he chose for no apparent reason. Later, William let slip that in addition to these victims, there could be 5 more girls whose disappearances occurred under similar circumstances. According to the suspect, he never robbed his victims. He chose girls who provided intimate services only because they were easy to lure into a trap, and hardly anyone would look for them after they disappeared. He admitted that he felt incredible excitement at the moment when the victims undressed, and then suddenly attacked from behind and strangled them with their own clothes. At this point, William's revelations about the fate of other victims stopped. He no longer wanted to talk to the investigators. The court took into account all the evidence, and the man was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to release.
It all began on February 10, 2004, when an event shook the small suburb of Altamont Springs in the state of Florida. A young girl and her boyfriend committed a horrific crime that shocked the local community with its brutality and cynicism. It involved the girl's father, a baseball bat, and a garbage container. Even after years of investigation, many details of this chilling act remain a mystery. Courtney Schulhoff, a young resident of Altamont Springs, found herself at the center of this gruesome story. A combination of youthful maximalism, immaturity, and a desire for revenge pushed her to commit a terrible crime, the murder of her own father. This case vividly demonstrates the tragic consequences that uncontrolled emotions and a lack of common sense can lead to. Altamont Springs, a cozy town with a population of about 40,000, is located in the heart of Florida, in Seminole County. Usually, it's a peaceful and safe place, ideal for family life and recreation. Its proximity to many tourist attractions makes Altamont Springs an attractive place to live. However, behind the external gloss and hospitality lies a dark side, as evidenced by the shocking case of Courtney Schulhoff. The quiet community of Altamont Springs became the arena for a chilling family drama that led to cold-blooded murder. This story reminds us that evil can hide behind a mask of ordinariness, and that even seemingly prosperous families can harbor terrible secrets. Courtney Christine Schulhoff was born in sunny Florida on December 27, 1987. Her parents were Stephen and Tracy Schulhoff, but unfortunately, their marriage did not stand the test of time. The divorce of her parents was a heavy blow for young Courtney, leaving a deep mark on her soul. After her mother left the family nest, the girl remained under the care of her father in the house where she spent her childhood. However, the lives of Stephen and Courtney underwent further changes when financial difficulties forced them to move to a new home. Initially, this news did not enthuse Courtney, but over time, she came to terms with the new circumstances. It seemed that life was gradually getting back on track, and the first few months in the new place were relatively calm. In 2003, Courtney was a student at Lyman High School. Once a diligent and successful student, after her parents' divorce, she began to rapidly lose interest in education. Skipping classes and indifference to grades turned the once promising student into an outsider. But changes were happening not only within the walls of the school. Outside the educational institution, Courtney fell under the influence of a dubious company. New friends with mixed reputations became her guides into a world far from the one she was used to. These acquaintances had a detrimental effect on the girl's personality, gradually changing her values and priorities. I have seen many similar stories. Parental divorce often becomes a trigger for problematic behavior in teenagers. A lack of attention, emotional instability, and a desire to be accepted in a new environment can push young people down the wrong path. However, even in the darkest times, there is always hope for change if the warning signs are recognized in time and a helping hand is extended. I could hardly believe my ears when I heard what happened next. Courtney's transformation was not limited to just her outward appearance. Her behavior became brazen and rebellious, challenging everyone around her. Naturally, the main blow was taken by her father, who embodied the main authority in the girl's life. Fierce conflicts erupted between them, fueling the fire of hostility and misunderstanding. The tension reached its peak when Courtney decided to temporarily move in with her mother, Tracy, seeking refuge from her father's control. However, this step proved to be short-lived. Tracy quickly realized that she was not ready to accept the new version of her daughter with all her problems and challenges. So, having no other choice, Stephen was forced to open the doors of his home to his prodigal daughter once again. Courtney's return home brought no relief. On the contrary, old problems flared up with renewed vigor, especially the issue of school attendance. The girl skipped classes more and more often, seeking solace in the company of her dubious friends. One of their favorite meeting places was the running track located near Lyman High School. It was here that fate brought Courtney together with Michael, a 20-year-old college student. A spark ignited between them, quickly growing into a passionate romance. It seemed that in Michael's arms, the girl found what she had been missing: so much understanding, support, and a sense of her own significance. However, would this meeting become a lifeline for Courtney, or, on the contrary, further entangle her in the web of problems? I have seen more than once how young people, finding themselves at a crossroads, seek salvation in romantic relationships. However, this is often just an illusion that hides the true roots of the problem. Without proper attention and help from loved ones, such connections can become a catalyst for even greater upheavals and dramas. Michael Morin, Courtney's new chosen one, seemed to be the complete opposite of the girl. A former high school football player, he demonstrated remarkable success in his studies, regularly receiving the highest grades. After entering a nearby college, Michael continued to follow the right path, meeting the expectations of his parents. However, meeting Courtney became a turning point in his life. Several weeks of intense communication turned their relationship into something more than just a teenage infatuation. Michael and Courtney became inseparable, spending every free moment together. Their obsession with each other overshadowed everything else, and soon Courtney practically stopped attending school, finally putting an end to her education. The news that his daughter had unofficially dropped out of school came as a real shock to Stephen Schulhoff. As a father who constantly fought with Courtney over her poor academic performance, he immediately saw the root of the problem in Michael. From the very beginning, a strong tension arose between them, which only exacerbated Courtney's already difficult relationship with her father. The girl perceived her father's dissatisfaction as an unwillingness to see her happy. Time and again, she tried to convince Stephen that Michael was a good person worthy of his trust. But the man remained adamant, as rumors had reached him about the young man's dark past associated with car theft. Stephen sincerely sought to warn his daughter against rash steps, but his words only met with a deaf wall of misunderstanding and stubbornness. I have witnessed similar situations more than once. Youthful infatuation often clouds the mind, causing young people to ignore the voice of reason and the advice of their elders. However, it is at such moments that it is extremely important to find the right approach so as not to push the child away, but to help them see reality. Unfortunately, in the case of Courtney and Stephen, it seems it was already too late for compromises. I was stunned when I learned about the unexpected twist in this story. The conflict between Courtney and her father Stephen reached a boiling point. The girl began to openly accuse him of abuse, and unfortunately, there were some grounds for this. One time, the situation spiraled out of control when Courtney invited friends over, including Michael. Stephen, returning home earlier than expected, caught them smoking and drinking alcohol. The enraged father burst into the room where the improvised party was taking place. Not holding back his emotions, he began to reproach his daughter for arranging a get-together without his permission. Screams and accusations filled the space, and eventually, in front of Courtney's friends, Stephen slapped her across the face. This moment became a turning point, as now the girl had real evidence of physical abuse by her father. Despite the seriousness of the situation, neither Courtney nor Stephen took any steps to resolve it. Instead, their relationship continued to plummet into an abyss of mutual resentment and disrespect. Although the girl had dropped out of school, she refused to look for a job. Instead, she used her father's credit card without permission, buying expensive clothes and things online. Courtney would bring home boxes of new purchases, disregarding Stephen's worsening financial situation. I have seen many similar situations where family conflicts reach a critical point. A lack of mutual understanding, an unwillingness to compromise, and the selfish actions of each party only intensify the tension. In the case of Courtney and Stephen, it seemed that they found themselves in an enchanted circle of mutual claims and grievances from which there was no way out. However, even in the most difficult situations, there is always a chance for reconciliation if both parties are willing to take a step towards each other. Perhaps if Stephen and Courtney had found the strength to sit down at the negotiating table, listen to each other, and try to find common ground, they could have avoided the tragic consequences. But unfortunately, they chose a different path, the path of confrontation and escalation of the conflict. The next fragment of this story made me hold my breath. Despite the escalation of the conflict, Courtney continued to act against her father's will. For several months, she secretly invited Michael to their home for overnight stays while Stephen was asleep. Even after her father categorically forbade her from seeing the young man, the girl found ways to circumvent this restriction. Instead of sneaking out to meet him, she openly brought Michael home whenever she pleased. Every conversation between Courtney and Stephen turned into a battlefield. The father did not spare harsh words towards his daughter and her chosen one, which only deepened the gulf between them. Over time, the situation became increasingly unmanageable, and it seemed that reconciliation was no longer possible. But one day, Stephen took an unexpected step. Upon opening his checkbook, he noticed that several pages were missing. Without hesitation, the man called the police and filed a report against his own daughter, hoping it would be a harsh lesson for her. After talking to the investigator, Courtney returned home, feeling a new level of fear towards her father. From now on, she perceived him not just as a strict and cruel authority figure, but as a real threat to her well-being. Personally, I have witnessed similar family dramas more than once. Conflicts between parents and children, especially during the teenage years, can be extremely exhausting and destructive. However, involving law enforcement in resolving family problems is always a last resort. Often, it only worsens the situation, undermining trust and creating an atmosphere of fear and mistrust. In the case of Courtney and Stephen, it seems all chances for a peaceful resolution of the conflict were lost. Instead of trying to find common ground, they chose the path of escalating the confrontation. By filing a report against his daughter, the father crossed a line after which a return to normal relations became practically impossible. The fear and resentment that gripped Courtney only fueled her desire to break free from Stephen's control at any cost. What happened next seemed unbelievable, but it was the truth. Courtney, consumed by fear and despair, was ready to do anything to get rid of the threat her father posed. But life made its own adjustments, further complicating the already tense situation. At the end of 2003, Stephen began dating a woman named Elaine. The details of their acquaintance remained a secret, but the very fact of her father's new relationship added fuel to the conflict. During the same period, Courtney, trying to somehow put her life in order, signed up for courses to obtain a high school diploma. At the same time, she continued to meet with Michael, despite Stephen's constant attempts to hinder their relationship. Eventually, the lovers, tired of the endless pressure, decided to run away together. The only obstacle on the path to their cherished freedom was the lack of transportation and money. Courtney and Michael's plan was simple. Take the young man's father's car and head to Maryland, where they hoped to find shelter and financial support from the girl's grandparents. But as often happens, even the most well-thought-out plans can fail. Having stolen the car, the lovers set off on their journey, full of hope for a better future. However, halfway to Maryland, they suddenly changed their minds and turned the car back towards home. What exactly prompted them to take this step remains a mystery, but the consequences of this act, especially for Michael, proved to be extremely unfavorable. I have seen it when young people, consumed by despair and a desire to break free from parental control, resorted to rash actions. Running away from home, stealing a car, all this seems like a solution to problems in the short term. But reality quickly puts everything in its place, and the consequences of such actions can be devastating for all parties involved. In the case of Courtney and Michael, their attempt to escape only worsened the already tense situation. Instead of finding freedom and understanding, they found themselves facing new challenges and threats. And although the reasons for their sudden decision to return home remain unknown, it can be assumed that fear of uncertainty and awareness of the real consequences of their actions played a significant role in this choice. What I learned next turned this case into a real labyrinth of secrets and mysteries. Michael's parents, just like Stephen, decided to turn to the law to punish their son for stealing the car. The young man found himself behind bars, where he spent a long 70 days pondering his actions and future. After his release, Michael was given a probationary period, but this was only the beginning of his problems. The young man's parents, convinced that Courtney had a detrimental effect on their son, began to insist on ending the relationship. From the outside, it was obvious that Michael and Courtney's relationship was far from healthy and constructive. However, neither the lovers nor their parents realized how much worse things could get. This was especially true for Stephen, Courtney's father, who did not even suspect that his life would be tragically cut short a few months later. After Michael's return from imprisonment, the situation escalated to a critical point. The young man's parents, especially his father, continued to pressure their son, demanding that he break off his relationship with Courtney. But Michael was adamant in his decision to stay with his beloved. This led to his angry parents kicking the young man out of the house, leaving him homeless. Finding himself on the street, Michael found shelter in the most unexpected place, the apartment of his girlfriend's father. Under the cover of night, he would sneak into Stephen's dwelling to spend the night there. It wasn't the first time the young man had secretly stayed in the apartment, but now it had become a daily routine. From a detective's point of view, this situation was explosive. The tension between Michael, Courtney, and Stephen had reached its peak, and any little thing could become the spark that would ignite this powder keg. Michael's nightly visits, his presence in the house despite Stephen's categorical prohibition, created an atmosphere of constant fear and mistrust. All the participants in this drama seemed to be blinded by their emotions and desires, not noticing the obvious risks and dangers. The lovers sought to be together at any cost, not realizing that their actions only worsened the situation. The parents, in turn, tried to control the lives of their children, not realizing that excessive pressure only pushed them into each other's arms. What happened next exceeded all my wildest assumptions. The situation with Michael and Courtney was rapidly spiraling out of control. The young man, having left his college education, actually settled in Stephen's house without his knowledge or consent. Moreover, Michael even changed his official address to Courtney's father's residence and listed his home phone number as a contact person in his parole plans. All of this was happening behind Stephen's back, who had no idea of the extent of Michael's intrusion into his life. Despite the fact that the young man had effectively become homeless, he made no effort to find a job and provide for himself. Instead, all the expenses fell on Courtney's shoulders, who shamelessly used her father's credit card. When the card's limit was exhausted, Stephen planned to have a serious conversation with his daughter about her irresponsible behavior. But fate had other plans, and what happened next forever changed the lives of all the participants in this drama. On February 10, 2014, Elaine, Stephen's new companion, tried to call him several times but to no avail. Worried by the long silence, the woman decided to personally visit her beloved's home. Sometime between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, Elaine got behind the wheel of her car and headed to Stephen's residence. What she saw as she approached the house instantly aroused her suspicion. On the sidewalk, she noticed Michael, Courtney's boyfriend, walking Stephen's dog. He was wearing one of the homeowner's t-shirts, which in itself was strange. But what alarmed Elaine the most was Michael's reaction when their eyes met. The young man, seeing her in the car, instantly rushed to call someone, as if he had been caught at the scene of a crime. This behavior only intensified the feeling that something was very wrong. As an experienced detective, I know that intuition rarely fails in such situations. Although Elaine had no direct evidence, she felt that Michael's strange behavior concealed something sinister. His presence in Stephen's house, his free use of the owner's belongings, and his instant panicked reaction to Elaine's appearance were all alarming signals that could not. Elaine, wasting no time, got out of the car and headed for the front door of Stephen's house. At the threshold, she met Courtney, but the door was locked. When asked about her father's whereabouts, the girl shrugged, replying that she had no idea. Then she walked away, leaving Elaine standing in front of the closed door without a key. The woman noticed that Stephen's truck was still parked in its usual spot and decided to call the police. Local law enforcement officers arrived at Elaine's call and, having obtained a search warrant, entered the house through the back door. What they found inside stunned even the seasoned cops. In Stephen's bedroom, the walls were splattered with blood, and a bloodied baseball bat lay near the bed. But the most horrifying sight awaited them in a plastic garbage can the owner's mutilated body with a torn-off ear and a shattered face. Whoever committed this crime wasn't too concerned about hiding the traces. In addition, the police found bank statements on the dining table, some of which were marked with a pen. Courtney was nowhere to be seen. Elaine, who knew about the tense relationship between Stephen, his daughter, and her boyfriend, immediately suspected foul play. Law enforcement quickly organized a search for the suspects, but as it turned out, neither Courtney nor Michael tried too hard to escape or hide. The young man was found in the restroom of a nearby shopping mall, wearing Stephen's t-shirt, just as Elaine had said. He had the victim's wallet, car keys, and credit cards on him. Michael was detained for questioning. As for Courtney, it was even simpler. The girl turned herself in to the police at her mother's house. During interrogations, Courtney and Michael gave completely different testimonies. The young man initially claimed that he was living in the basement of Stephen's house, knew nothing about his death, and received the items from Courtney. He explained his escape to the mall by fear that the homeowner would find out about his presence. But when the police informed Michael about the murder, he suddenly changed his testimony. With tears in his eyes, the young man stated that everything happened as if in a fog, and he came to his senses already with a bloody bat in his hands. Michael confessed to the crime, but insisted that he acted at Courtney's instigation, who asked him to kill her father because of a conflict over money spent from a credit card. His story sounded confusing and unconvincing. Courtney, during the first interrogation, blamed everything on Michael, assuring that she only learned about her father's death from the young man. But later, in a separate confession, she told the detectives more details. According to her, the idea of murder belonged to Michael, and she only helped to take Stephen's dog out of the room and prepared the bat. While the young man was dealing with her sleeping and defenseless father, Courtney heard every sound. But the most unexpected twist occurred in September 2006, when at the final stage of the trial, Courtney was found guilty. Asked if she wanted to say something, the girl, who had been denying her involvement all this time, suddenly stated, "I would like to openly admit that Michael Morin is not the murderer of my father. I take full responsibility and accept the sentence handed down to me." This shocking statement was heard in the courtroom where Courtney Schulhoff was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to parole. She listened to the verdict without visible emotion. Less than a year later, in April 2007, the trial of Michael Morin took place. He faced the death penalty if found guilty. And again, Courtney repeated that only she committed the crime and Michael knew nothing about it. However, her words contradicted the testimony of the young man himself, who even added new details allegedly. He and Courtney stopped by McDonald's and thought about throwing Stephen's body off a bridge. In the end, Michael Morin was also found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. According to information from 2017, Courtney Schulhoff's sentence was reduced to approximately 40 years. This case remains one of the most enigmatic in my practice. Despite the fact that both criminals received their deserved punishment, it is still unclear what really happened on that fateful night. Undoubtedly, Stephen was killed with a baseball bat, but who dealt the fatal blow remains an open question. On the one hand, Courtney confessed to killing her father. On the other hand, Michael also admitted his guilt, and it was in his basement that Stephen's bloody t-shirt, which the young man often wore, was found. Moreover, Michael was much larger and stronger than Courtney, so he had enough strength to deal with the victim using a bat. However, we should not forget that Stephen was sleeping and could not resist. And Courtney was able to describe the course of the crime in detail and even characterize her father's dying sounds. So who actually committed this brutal murder? Christine Johnson, like many little girls, dreamed of a Hollywood star's life from childhood being beautiful, wealthy, and famous. She grew up in a loving family, had a happy childhood, and ambitious plans for the future. Christine's desire to become famous came true, but unfortunately, not due to her talents. but because of the cruelty of her killer, and the details will shock you because her body was found with a torn-off ear. Born in 1981 in Santa Clara, California, Christine soon moved with her parents, Teresa and Kirk Johnson, to the small town of Saugatuck in Michigan. It was a cozy and picturesque place with a population of less than 1,000 people, where an atmosphere of peace and security prevailed. Crime here was extremely low, so locals didn't even lock their doors, not fearing criminals. Everyone in the community knew each other. Christine grew up along with her brother Derek, who was a few years older, in a family that seemed friendly and happy at first glance. However, the family idyll was shattered when the parents decided to divorce. Despite this, they maintained a good relationship for the sake of the children. According to the custody plan, Christine and Derek alternately lived with their mom and dad. Due to such circumstances, the girl got involved in household chores early and started helping her mother at the age of 12, including with the family budget. Striving for financial independence, Christine tried to get any job so as not to ask her parents for money. Meanwhile, her brother went to serve in the army and then decided to become a career military man. While studying in high school, Christine, having become independent, took her life into her own hands. Intelligence and natural beauty helped her in this. The girl was cheerful, fun, and an interesting conversationalist. She looked great thanks to an active and healthy lifestyle. Relatives, admiring Christine's beauty, advised her to conquer Hollywood. The girl got the most pleasure from sailing, surfing, and other water activities that she enjoyed when visiting her grandmother in California. However, after returning to Michigan, Christine missed her favorite hobbies and needed time to adjust to a different way of life. Here she became passionate about theater, being a member of a small acting group. In winter, she worked part-time as a waitress in a local cafe. Thanks to her friendliness, politeness, and sociability, Christine became a real find for the owner of the establishment, attracting more and more visitors. Christine increasingly thought about leaving the small town of Saugatuck. The measured life of the province did not appeal to her. The girl was convinced that she deserved something more than just serving food in a cafe. Christine saw no serious prospects for herself in this town. After graduating from high school in 1999, she finally gained enough freedom to start building her own life and path to success. Having thought over her situation, Christine decided to go in search of herself. The girl traveled to different cities, worked there, and tried her hand at various fields of activity. Eventually, in 2000, she chose California, which she loved so much, as her place of residence. This state attracted her with its wonderful climate and much wider opportunities for realizing her potential. At first, Christine moved in with her grandmother, who lived in the small resort town of Santa Maria with a population of 100,000 people. Despite being close to her favorite entertainment, the girl first focused on solving important issues. First of all, she started looking for a job, because providing for herself was very important to her. Christine got a job as a system administrator in the city's electric power company. Then she focused on her education and decided to enter the University of California. The educational institution was located a 40-minute drive from her grandmother's house. Christine successfully passed the entrance tests and bought a car with the money she had earned earlier. However, even with her own transport, daily trips over such long distances took too much of her time. Therefore, the girl began to look for a job closer to the university. This is how Christine first touched her dream Hollywood. She managed to get a part-time job with a film crew that was planning to shoot a movie. The experience of performing in a theater group helped the girl quickly adapt to the new working atmosphere. Eventually, she was hired as an assistant on the set of a thriller. Here, Christine met people who lived and breathed Hollywood. For a girl from the province, it was a real starry moment. She communicated with world-famous actors and directors and felt incredible happiness. Christine could not believe that she had the opportunity to interact with celebrities. The world of cinema completely captivated her. This work inspired young Christine so much that she wanted to be even closer to the film industry. The girl enrolled in professional makeup courses taught by Hollywood makeup artists. Having mastered these skills, she thought about becoming a makeup artist on a film set. For this, Christine was going to go to the city of her dreams, Los Angeles. Although it was quite a risky journey, curiosity overcame the fear of the unknown. The girl was irresistibly drawn to Hollywood. Eventually, Christine moved to Los Angeles, a city where several famous film studios are located at once. For a young and attractive girl, it was a real period of trials and temptations, but she demonstrated the best manners and decency that only a young lady is capable of. Despite the popular trends in the environment she found herself in, Christine did not lead a dissolute lifestyle. The girl avoided noisy parties and get-togethers, remaining a rather modest person. She had a relationship with a guy she had met a few years ago and continued to communicate with, overcoming the distance between them. Later, he moved to Christine, and starting from 2002, the young people decided to rent an apartment in Los Angeles together. Since they had not yet achieved financial stability, such a step was beneficial for both of them. It was a difficult adventure, but Christine did not lose heart and began to look for a new job on a permanent basis. However, difficulties arose with this. The girl managed to find only temporary part-time jobs, and there was no serious work. The lion's share of their joint budget was earned by her boyfriend. Meanwhile, relations between Christine and Todd became more and more tense. Later, the girl complained to her mother that verbal altercations with her beloved increasingly turned into physical violence on his part. She found herself trapped in a toxic relationship, complicated by financial hardship. Christine's mother began to look for new housing for her daughter so that she could move away from her problematic partner. Eventually, Christine broke up with her boyfriend and settled in a small apartment. She continued to get an education remotely. During this period, her father provided the girl with substantial financial support. He believed that his daughter would finally find her place in life and realize her calling, so he sought to help her in every possible way. By November 2002, Christine finally managed to get a job at a mobile communications company, but this position was far from her ideals. Neither the field of activity nor the level of income met the girl's expectations. In addition, Christine still could not find acceptable housing near her place of work. Instead, her mother found a cozy house in the town of Santa Monica, neighboring Los Angeles, which had to be shared with 2 more girls. The attractive thing was that it was located next to the beach in a lively residential area. It seemed like an ideal place to get on her feet, so Christine moved there. During this period, the girl transferred to the University of Santa Monica. Christine's dreams of Hollywood did not come true. She failed to start a career, her relationship with her beloved fell apart, and she was actually forced to start her life from scratch. However, the girl did not lose heart and continued to steadily go towards her dream. On February 15, 2003, Christine planned to attend a party. Before that, the young beauty visited a shopping center. She had a long, fun conversation with her mother, during which they discussed the girl's plans for the future. This call was Christine's last contact with her loved ones. The next day, on Sunday, February 16, 2003, the mother was eagerly waiting for a call from her daughter, hoping to hear about how the previous day had gone. However, the girl never got in touch. The worried woman tried to call Christine herself, but her phone was unavailable. At first, this did not cause serious concern, because the daughter could be resting or at work and not hear the call. However, the next day there was still no news from Christine. Around 9 in the morning, the alarmed mother called her daughter's work. Christine was always in touch and answered calls, but this time an answering machine worked instead of her. Then the woman contacted the girl's manager, who informed her that she had not shown up for work. He emphasized that Christine was a very responsible employee, and during the last 3 months she had no delays or absenteeism. The girl's absence surprised all her colleagues, but they also could not reach her. As the manager said, Christine was last seen at work on February 14th. One of her co-workers recalled that the girl was going to some party. The mother of the missing girl visited her daughter's page on social networks, hoping to find useful information about this event. But in vain, Christine had not published a single photo. Although previously she actively maintained her profile, actually documenting every step of her life. The woman also checked her daughter's bank accounts, but no transactions had been made since her disappearance. In search of her daughter, the mother called all the hospitals, but Christine was not registered anywhere. So on February 17th, she decided to contact the Santa Monica Police Department with a statement about the disappearance of her 21-year-old daughter. The investigators checked whether a girl matching the description had been involved in traffic accidents during these days, but found nothing. The missing beauty's neighbors also heard nothing about her since her disappearance. The police turned to Christine's ex-boyfriend, Todd, with whom she had a rather stormy and sometimes violent relationship. The version was considered that he could have found his beloved who had run away from him and done something to her, but the young man denied seeing the girl. Christine's neighbors were only able to provide superficial information about the last day they saw the girl. According to them, on Saturday, February 15th, the missing girl was going to some party, but with whom and where exactly they did not know. The same information came from the girl's colleagues when they communicated with her mother. This clue became the first in the investigation, so the detectives began to carefully check it. Later, another detective joined the case. While reviewing the collected materials, he was struck by the photo of the missing girl. The crime victim bore a striking resemblance to another girl who had disappeared earlier and was found dead in 1995. That girl, starting her modeling career, agreed to a photo shoot for the glossy magazine Photographer, but these plans were not destined to come true. It was about Linda Sobek, killed by photographer Charles Redburn. He lured the beautiful blonde out of town by deception, where he dishonored and took her life. The policeman knew that at the time of Christine's disappearance, Linda's killer was already serving a sentence in prison, so physically he could not be involved in the new crime. However, it could be a follower of Charles who was inspired by his scheme of action. Detectives needed at least some clue related to the missing girl, so they put out an alert for her car, a white Mazda Mitre. At the same time, while communicating with Christine's mother, investigators found out more details about the girl's ex-boyfriend Todd, and also learned the name of her new chosen one, Lucas. However, the woman knew very little about the latter. She could not even name his last name, which greatly complicated the search. More than 48 hours had passed since Christine's disappearance, a critical period in such cases. The police seriously considered the possibility that the girl might already be dead. They began to analyze the billing data of her mobile phone. It turned out that the last outgoing call was made on February 15th at 17:34. Christine called the directory service at 411, which could indicate that she was in trouble and was trying to clarify an address or someone's phone number. The conversation lasted about 3 minutes, so this communication could be of great importance for the investigation. Unfortunately, it was not possible to find out the exact content of the dialogue, since such calls were not recorded. After that conversation, the girl's mobile phone was discharged. The last location of the gadget, recorded by the system, indicated the area of Ventura Boulevard. The police decided to involve the media in the investigation. The headlines immediately featured messages about Christine's disappearance with hints of the similarity of this case to Linda's murder. In search of clues, investigators carefully searched the apartment where Christine lived. Among the finds was a receipt from a lingerie store, dated the day the girl disappeared, February 15th. The police managed to find out that, despite the aggressive behavior of her ex-boyfriend, Christine continued to maintain contact with him. Sometimes she visited him, the last time on February 7th, but the detectives managed to find the most serious clue while studying the missing girl's email. On February 13th, Christine sent a message to the party coordinator, in which she expressed a passionate anticipation of the holiday and her intention to buy a ticket. In response, she was informed about the complete sale of tickets, but assured that she would be included in a separate waiting list. This is a fairly common practice among organizers of events. With the participation of celebrities in this way, they encourage visitors to buy VIP tickets at greatly inflated prices. Finally, the police managed to find Christine's new boyfriend, Lucas, and talk to him. According to the young man, he last saw the girl on February 14th, the day before her disappearance. They watched a movie together, after which they parted. Lucas successfully passed a polygraph test, had a reliable alibi, and did not arouse any suspicion among the investigators. Later, the detectives interrogated Christine's ex-boyfriend Todd, but he also had an alibi, confirmed by several witnesses. It turned out that at the time of the girl's disappearance, Todd was out of town. Among all the versions, the police were most interested in the one that was associated with the party where Christine was heading and from where she never returned. Investigators were convinced that the key to unraveling the girl's disappearance lies here. They contacted the organizers of the event and were shocked by what they heard. It turns out that Christine never bought a ticket and did not show up at the party. But where did the girl go then? To restore the chronology of events on the fateful evening, the police tracked transactions from the missing girl's bank card. This helped to establish all the stores that Christine visited that day. Law enforcement officers carefully reviewed the recordings from video surveillance cameras in these establishments, hoping to identify something extraordinary or stumble upon clues. But this painstaking work took a lot of time. In parallel with the analysis of these data, the police received an alarming call. A woman named Susan Murphy reported a suspicious guy she met at a store. He introduced himself as Victor Thomas, an employee of a film company that conducts casting for a new James Bond movie. The man began to put psychological pressure on Susan, inviting her to the role of Bond's girl and admiring her beauty. He persistently inclined the woman to participate in the casting. But this seemed extremely suspicious to her. Susan barely managed to refuse at the last moment. Fortunately, she went to meet with the stranger accompanied by her husband, a former police officer. Susan's husband personally spoke with Victor, trying to inquire about his true intentions, but the suspect suddenly fled without providing any useful information. Later, Susan decided to check all the data she knew about Victor and found out that he was lying. Victor Thomas had nothing to do with the film industry. Moreover, a person with that name did not exist at all. It seems that the man invented a legend, similar to Linda Sabic's killer, in order to meet a beautiful woman. But for what purpose remained a mystery. Although Susan's story ended well, Victor was still at large and could continue his shenanigans. Therefore, the police urgently began to check the received information and search for the suspicious guy. It was quite possible that he had evil intentions. Investigators studied the recordings from surveillance cameras of all the stores where Christine made purchases on the eve of her disappearance, but found nothing worthy of attention. Then they decided to go around the shops and interview the staff. The salespeople were shown a sketch of Victor, who allegedly harassed beautiful girls. In one of the stores, the cashier recalled seeing a similar man, but could not provide any more details. Eventually, an artist arrived on the scene to compile a sketch of the suspect. The search for Christine was gaining momentum. Dog handlers with dogs and volunteers were sent to the area from where the girl last got in touch and called the directory service. Patrols and volunteers continued to look for the missing girl's car and Christine herself. There were many messages from citizens that a similar car was seen in different places, but all these clues turned out to be false. Finally, on February 24th, an important signal was received by the police. In the parking lot of the shopping center that Christine visited on the day of her disappearance, her car was found a white Mazda Miata. The forensic expert who arrived at the scene conducted a thorough inspection of the interior, seized fingerprints and all potential evidence. A bottle of water was found on the back seat, and the missing girl's mobile phone was on the front seat. But the investigators were most surprised by the story of the parking lot guide. The man recalled a strange incident related to this car. The car drove into the spot at 17:45, although it was reserved for another client. Some man got out of the car who, upon hearing the guard's remark, behaved extremely aggressively. The stranger threw the car keys at the guard and left without any explanation. There was no one in the cabin at that time. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the parking lot, so it was not possible to see the driver. Having no clues, the detectives decided to return to the analysis of Christine's purchases on the day of her disappearance. What they found shocked the investigators. On the eve of her disappearance, the girl bought clothes that exactly matched the description provided by Susan. When inviting the woman to the casting, Victor asked her to wear an extremely short black mini-skirt, a white blouse, stockings and shoes. It was these very items that were paid for with Christine's credit card. The police ruled out the possibility of a simple coincidence. It seemed that the girl had fallen for the bait of a fraudster whose true motives remained a mystery. Christine repeated Susan's fate. Only the latter was lucky to have an escort in the form of her husband. Unfortunately, no information about the mysterious Victor could be found, and law enforcement officers were at an impasse. They turned to Christine's roommates again. The girls recalled that the missing woman was indeed going to some kind of casting, but they could not provide any details. During the conversation, they managed to remember that the audition was definitely related to a James Bond movie. According to them, Christine was extremely excited on the eve of the event. The description of her outfit, a blouse and a mini-skirt in which she left the house, completely coincided with the officers' fears. Christine was very afraid of being late for the casting scheduled for 17:30. She was wearing the exact revealing clothes that the villain had asked Susan to wear, and possibly Christine herself. Detectives continued to review the surveillance camera footage over and over again, hoping to find Victor. Eventually, they managed to spot the right man in the store where the employees mentioned him. However, the video quality was so low that it was impossible to make out facial features. Still, it was at least some kind of lead. Using eyewitness testimony, investigators were able to compile an approximate portrait of the suspect. By February 26th, a sketch of the main suspect in the disappearance of the young beauty was created. One of the experienced detectives, having familiarized himself with the case materials, recognized Victor Paleologus in it, who had been released on parole very recently, on January 20th, 23. In the past, the man had already been convicted of a sexual crime. Among the episodes of his rich criminal past, There was a case when he lured a woman named Christine Kludgian to his apartment in a similar manner. After inviting her to a supposedly noisy party with celebrities, Victor met the victim in an empty, quiet house. There he began to harass the guest, and when she resisted, he attacked her. The attacker used a rope, strangled Christine with it, and then tried to tie the woman up for violence. But the victim had enough strength to break free, run out of the apartment, and call the neighbors for help. Victor Paleologus used the same scheme, luring victims with promises of casting or invitations to parties. This technique worked flawlessly, especially near the Walk of Fame. Many girls came to Los Angeles in search of fulfilling their Hollywood dream, and villains like Victor took advantage of this. For the first attack on a girl, Paleologus got off with only a suspended sentence. Later, there was an attempt to dishonor Katie DeBiono in 1998. Then he called himself Brian, a movie producer. For this crime, he was punished with a minimum term. There was reason to believe that Victor was also involved in embezzlement of funds in the company where he previously worked. In addition, the police identified many other victims, women whom Paleologus tried to use. However, all the statements of the victims were ignored by law enforcement officers due to lack of evidence. Once Victor broke into the house of his ex-girlfriend. Although he did not manage to bring his criminal intent to the end, the man still stole money and jewelry from the home. And even for this act, he got off with only a suspended sentence. Later, an even more serious case occurred. Victor lured a girl named Heather into a trap. As always, he incited her to dress in a seductive manner. It seems that this particular appearance of the victim excited him the most. Then Paleologus tried to tie the girl up in order to get intimate, but Heather miraculously managed to break free. Somehow she managed to push the attacker away with the sharp heel of her shoe. These precious seconds allowed her to run out of the trap and hide in her own car. The girl filed a statement against the offender. For this crime, Victor received 2 years in prison, but was released on parole on January 20th, 2003. This happened just 3 weeks before Christine's disappearance. It seems that once at liberty, the repeat offender took up the old. By the time the police got on the trail of Paleologus, he had already been arrested. This time he stole a BMW X5 in Beverly Hills and tried to sell the car with forged documents. The detainee was found to have a wallet with a whole bunch of stolen IDs, credit cards, and other documents. Victor perfectly matched the type of criminal involved in Christine's disappearance. His handwriting completely coincided with what was known to the investigation. All the facts pointed to Paleologus, so the detectives decided to show his photo to Susan, who avoided the attack thanks to the intervention of her husband. At the police station, Susan unhesitatingly pointed to Victor's photograph among other pictures. Later, during the identification procedure, she again unmistakably identified him, noting that she immediately recognized the man, despite obvious attempts to change his appearance. Paleologus slouched a little, extended one arm, making it longer than the other, and combed his hair in a new way. But all these tricks did not help him avoid exposure. During a separate check, Susan's husband, who once tried to detain the criminal, also recognized him. Unfortunately, the parking lot guard where the missing girl's car was found could not identify the suspect. He only managed to see Victor for a moment from afar and in the dark, without seeing his face. At the time the photo was presented, Paleologus was already behind bars, although on the day of Christine's disappearance he was still at large. During the interrogation, the suspect denied any involvement in the girl's disappearance and flatly refused to admit the fact of communicating with Susan, despite the presence of irrefutable evidence to the contrary. Victor refused to testify without a lawyer, explaining this by his recent parole and fears that he was being framed. So the detectives continued to collect evidence against him. Soon a new witness came forward, a realtor who had been working with Victor for the last few weeks and noticed some oddities in his behavior. Paleologus was looking through a real estate agent for a house worth up to $700,000. They inspected several properties every day, when suddenly a message came about the disappearance of documents and keys from one of the houses. Then the realtor did not even suspect that his client could be involved in this. But as soon as he saw Victor's photo in the news summary, everything fell into place. The witness also identified the suspect. According to him, their last meeting took place just a day before Christine's disappearance. Then Victor behaved strangely. He was somewhat nervous. In one of the inspected houses, he went to the toilet and began to shout loudly from there, allegedly checking the quality of sound insulation. The police suggested that this way the man could look for a place for his criminal actions, where the screams of the victims would remain unheard. detectives examined all the houses that Paleologos visited. They paid special attention to the object that so intrigued the suspect. Interestingly, this dwelling was located in the same area where Christine's mobile phone signal was last recorded. Investigators literally turned the house upside down, looking for at least some evidence of Victor's involvement in the girl's disappearance or her possible body, but found nothing. Meanwhile, searches continued in Paleologos' apartment. Photos of women in clothes that the suspect seemed to especially like were found on his computer. A short skirt, a white blouse, stockings and high-heeled shoes. It had been 12 days since the start of the investigation, but the missing girl's family still cherished the hope of Christine returning home alive. Victor continued to deny everything and was in no hurry to share any information with the police. He only confirmed the fact of meeting the girl, after which, according to him, they went their separate ways and he did not see her again. Victor Paleologos was born in 1962 in Pennsylvania into an ordinary family. He was the youngest of 5 brothers. The man graduated from college with a bachelor's degree, after which he entered graduate school in Los Angeles. From 1990 to 1993, he was married. Interestingly, some facts indicated that in 1991 Victor could have tried to poison his wife when she filed a statement against him. All of Paleologos' attempts to organize his own restaurant business failed. It seemed that this was a world-weary loser who had slipped into a life of crime. It seems that Victor's fetish for beautiful women forced him to cross a dangerous line, and he began to attack them for the purpose of intimacy and sexual gratification. Regarding the evening of Christine's disappearance, Paleologos, together with his lawyer, provided an alibi. Allegedly, Victor had dinner with an acquaintance in a restaurant. This information was indeed confirmed. But law enforcement officers understood that despite this, the man still had enough time to play out another criminal drama and kidnap a new victim. On March 1st, another witness called the police. According to his statement, on February 15th, he saw the missing girl. She stopped near his house in search of some mansion that resembled a castle. The man could not help her because he himself did not know where this building was located. Instead, his wife, hearing their conversation, told Christine the direction. The incident occurred around 1730. Now it became clear for what purpose the girl dialed the number of the directory service 411. She needed navigation to a building that looked like a castle. Investigators had a new lead. Moreover, it was in such a house that Victor checked the quality of sound insulation. Everything pointed to him. While the detectives were working with this data, a new event occurred. On March 3rd, 2003, 4 teenage friends were walking through the Hollywood Hills, admiring the picturesque panorama of Los Angeles. Suddenly, one of the guys, approaching the edge of a cliff, noticed some strange object below, 100 meters from him. At first, the young men thought it was a mannequin. They tried to go down to take a closer look at the find, but could not overcome the entire distance. However, this was enough to understand that it was a human body. The frightened guys for a long time could not decide what to do next, because none of them took a mobile phone with them. Eventually, they went to the police station. On the way, the teenagers met a woman who was walking dogs and told her about the horrendous find. She approached the body to make sure the guys were not mistaken. The victim was wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt. Her legs were tied and wrapped in blue fabric. The hands of the deceased were behind her back, and a hairband was on her right wrist. Below the waist, tattered stockings were visible. Frightened by what she saw, the woman called the police. Soon, law enforcement officers and rescuers arrived at the scene. They had to sweat a lot to get the mutilated body from the hard-to-reach area. Obviously, the criminal hoped that his victim would never be found here. Perhaps this would have happened if it were not for the quick-witted teenagers who accidentally wandered into this deserted area. The forensic expert identified the deceased as the missing Christine Johnson. Her body was found not far from the house that Victor liked so much during the real estate viewing with the realtor. The girl's parents were immediately informed about the tragic news, who could not believe the reality of what had happened and did not hold back their despair over the loss of their daughter. Christine's entire body was covered with bruises and scratches, indicating desperate attempts to resist. The corpse was in a terrible condition and had time to undergo significant putrefactive changes, lying under the scorching sun for more than 1 day. In addition, it rained 1 day. The face was especially disfigured, which was facilitated by both numerous injuries and the unnatural position of the deceased's body with her head lowered. Someone tore off the girl's ear. The expert also noted large bruises on Christine's head and neck, which indicated a traumatic brain injury and strangulation. Initially, this was recognized as the cause of death, but soon even more horrific details were clarified. Investigators had no doubt that it was Victor Paleologos who was involved in the murder of Christine Johnson. However, it was necessary to prove that at the time of the girl's death, the suspect did not have an alibi. For this purpose, the detectives went to Joey, an acquaintance with whom Victor allegedly had dinner that fatal evening. But it turned out that in fact it was not a friend, but a casual acquaintance. During a thorough interrogation, the man admitted that he and Victor had agreed to meet much later than the incident with Christine occurred. According to Joey, they met Paleologos only the day before. On February 15th, Victor was late for the meeting, arriving around midnight, although they initially planned to meet much earlier. The suspect's face had fresh scratches, which he explained as an accidental injury during the move. The police step-by-step recreated the probable sequence of events that preceded the disappearance of Christine Johnson. According to the investigation, the criminal noticed a beautiful young girl in a shopping center where he often hunted for victims and decided to act according to the usual scenario. He introduced himself as a film industry worker and offered Christine to audition for the role of James Bond's girl. Victor was remarkably convincing. Acting according to a well-established scheme, he showered the girl with compliments, assuring that she was perfect for this role. Given Christine's youth and ambitions, she believed the villain and could not refuse the tempting offer. Paleologos scheduled a meeting in one of the houses that he recently inspected with a realtor, explaining that this was where the audition would take place. Christine, somewhere deep down suspecting a trap, still prepared for the casting and dressed the way Victor asked. She arrived at the place with a slight delay, as she got lost on the way and contacted the directory service. This is how the girl found herself in the clutches of a deadly trap from which she never got out. During the meeting, Christine became a victim of Victor's harassment, but desperately resisted and even managed to scratch his face. But she had nowhere to run, and the physically stronger man quickly overcame the resistance. Paleologos dishonored the helpless girl and then killed her to get rid of an unwanted witness. First, he hit her on the head and strangled her, and only then threw the mutilated body into the Hollywood Hills. But the most terrible thing was that the traumatic brain injury and strangulation did not lead to Christine's instant death. The girl only lost consciousness, and the inhuman Victor mistook it for death. By throwing the body off a cliff, he doomed the victim to a slow and painful death. Christine, having fallen from a considerable height, received numerous fractures and internal injuries. She regained consciousness for some time, but never waited for rescue, bleeding to death alone. Only a few hours later, the girl finally died from her injuries. On May 12, 2003, the district attorney officially charged Victor Paleologos with kidnapping, violence, and first-degree murder. However, the defense was fully prepared to defend the client's innocence because there was a lack of direct evidence of his guilt. The prosecution faced a difficult battle, so forensic experts used all the available weighty arguments. Victor's lawyers questioned the time of the victim's death, referring to the insects found on the body. Instead, prosecutors emphasized the striking similarity of the killer's handwriting with previous attacks on women. The cases were so identical that it was impossible not to mention them in court. Preparation for the trial was delayed, so Victor Paleologos appeared before the jury only in July 2006. The defense emphasized that the prosecution actually had no material evidence against the defendant, no DNA analysis, no fingerprints, no video surveillance recordings that would link him to the murder. This was explained by the fact that Christine's mutilated body was found only 2 weeks after her disappearance, and during this time most of the traces had time to deteriorate. However, the testimony of women accusing Victor of harassment and attacks was more than enough. After their statements, the sympathies were on the side of the prosecution. Without exception, all the victims talked about Victor's remarkable talent for manipulation. The man was so careful and convincing that even the most cautious victims like Susan Murphy initially believed his sweet promises and agreed to take part in the alleged casting, not even suspecting what was really waiting for him. It seemed that after hearing this, no one had any doubts that it was Victor Paleologos who killed the unfortunate Christine. But the defendant had a last ace up his sleeve. To avoid the death penalty, Victor proposed to make a deal with the investigation and plead guilty to a less serious crime. Now the fate of Paleologos was in the hands of the relatives of the deceased girl. At that time, the exhausting trial had been going on for 3 weeks and threatened to drag on for a long time. Given the uncertainty of the verdict and the burden of the grief experienced, Christine's family agreed to make concessions in exchange for a confession. However, Victor unexpectedly changed his mind and on the day of sentencing sent the judge an 11-page petition asking to cancel his confession. Fortunately, the law was on the side of justice, and it was no longer possible to cancel the previous statement. The court found Victor Paleologus guilty on all counts and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the right to parole no earlier than after 25 years.